every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Moving Forward by Corinne Jean-Pierre. This is from the introduction, Coming to America. I carry something special in my wallet. My cousin, Jean-Pierre, gave it to me before my first day working for President Barack Obama in the White House. Remember this, he asked, as he handed me an old snapshot, the corners creased, the colors washed out. I gasped. I had forgotten the trip our extended family, me and my cousins, had taken to Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1982, just before I turned 8. There we were, seated on the base of the railing in front of the south lawn of the White House, with the Truman balcony in the far background. Jean gave me the photo to remind me of the pride my family takes in my success, of all of the people in the Haitian American community I carry on my shoulders. I kept that photo with me from then on. Every day when I got money out of that wallet for a cup of tea or a bagel at the cafeteria in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building in Washington, D.C., I couldn't help but glance at the image of that timid, skinny young girl sandwiched between my much older cousins. Back then, I was so shy that the nuns who taught kindergarten at my Catholic school called my mother in to say that they were worried about me. She doesn't play with other children, they said. She just keeps to herself. Over the years, I worked hard to overcome that. You've made us all proud, Jeanette told me. Code for how unlikely it was, inconceivable really, that anyone from our family could get to the White House. My Haitian-American father and mother, a New York City taxi driver and a home health care aide, didn't closely follow American politics. They were more likely to discuss the viciously oppressive dictator dynasty of Francois Papa Doc Duvalier and his son Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier, who ruled Haiti from 1957 to 1986, than any American president. Like many immigrants, they came here to find a better life for their children. I was proof that their struggle had been worth it. As an openly gay woman of color, I have also had my own struggles entering the world of politics, which even now can feel like a boys' club. Despite the record number of women who ran and won in the 2018 U.S. midterm elections, women occupy less than 23% of the seats in Congress, even though more than half of the population is women. But when I was in the White House, I was usually too busy to think about how I had gone from being that meek schoolgirl with braids to the confident woman in a crisp tailored pantsuit who worked as Obama's regional political director in the Office of Political Affairs. I was the eyes and ears of the President of the United States in 12 northeastern states, from Maryland to Maine. The Political Affairs Wing has 3 offices and a corner on the first floor of the EEOB. The Eisenhower Executive Office Building is a beautiful historic building close to the White House's West Wing. The West Wing is home to the Oval Office where the U.S. President works. The first time I flashed my security clearance badge to the sharply dressed Marine standing guard at the double-door entrance and walked into the West Wing, I remember looking around and thinking, this is so small. It looks so much bigger on TV. As a campaign operative for Senator John Edwards in 2007 and 2008, I binge-watched the NBC 1999 to 2006 series starring Martin Sheen as a fictional American president named Josiah Bartlett. Still, it's hard not to be awed. I also felt a constant sense of responsibility because I was a black woman working for the first black American president. When you work at the White House, whether it's for a Democrat or a Republican, you have to put in a 12 to 15-hour workday or more. There's a reason why most people don't last a whole 4-year term, and under President Donald Trump, turnover among his staff has occurred at an historically high rate. It's an absolute joy, but it's also a heavy lift. I like to get there between 7 and 7:30 in the morning to prepare for our first meeting at 9 o'clock, and I rarely left before 9 p.m. I would go home to my furnished basement apartment in a semi-sketchy part of town in Northeast Washington. I had taken a pay cut to work in the White House. My place was cold, dark, and dreary, but I knew I didn't need more than a place to crash. A good night's sleep was never a given. There were plenty of times that my boss emailed me at 1 or 2 in the morning expecting me to get back to him ASAP, and I did. In those days, I walked around with a BlackBerry phone, the preferred device for politicos, for White House work in one hand, and in the other hand, another BlackBerry issued by the Democratic National Committee for political work. Taxpayers did not pay for President Obama to do fundraisers or other political events, so having different phones for different purposes kept us honest and out of trouble. Because I was so intent on doing things the right way, I even carried a third phone, a personal one, in my pants pocket for calls and emails with family and friends. This was not a requirement. I just wanted to be extra mindful. The stakes were too big to make a mistake. The pressure was high, but I was proud of my role and wouldn't hide it. When phone number 3 rang and I would tell the person on the other end I had just gotten off Air Force One with the president, or I was about to make a trip with Vice President Joe Biden on Air Force Two, they would say, "Karine, listen to you. You don't even realize how cool your job is." Getting involved in politics can be intimidating. If you weren't participating in Debate Club or Young Democrats of America or Model United Nations by the time you finished high school, I know it can feel like you have no choice in politics. That's why I'm writing this book. I am proof that that's not true. I was a late bloomer. You hear stories about folks whose passions and talents were already obvious by the time they were in kindergarten. I am not like that. I first ran for office at Columbia University, and I wasn't drawn to a career in politics until after graduate school. Just how little did my family discuss American politics growing up? Meet Michael Dukakis. The first time I encountered politics was late on a Thursday night in July 1988. I was 13 years old. My sister Esther was 6, and my brother Daniel 4. My siblings and I were curled up on my parents' queen-size bed watching the television that sat in the corner of my mother's wooden vanity dresser. Moving Forward by Karine Jean-Pierre.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And top of the morning or afternoon or whatever it may be to you. Boy, yesterday we talked a lot about guns, and at the end of the day, I saw this amazing tweet that I just, I have to share with you. It's like the sudden forehead slap. Ricardo Minami tweeted, "Tom, if the theory about good guys with guns and adding more guns as a solution, in other words, to keep us all safe, was correct, then we'd be the safest country in the world, right? We're awash in guns. But we're not so safe." Anyhow, I just wanted to put that punctuation mark on yesterday's program. Today I want to get into the future of civilization. I want to tell you what's going on with the economy. We want to talk about some of the really skeezy stuff that the Trump administration is up to. Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us for our entire second hour, taking your calls, Middays with Mark. And in our third hour, George Beebe, who has a new book out, The Russia Trap, is going to be with us. George has kind of an interesting background working with the CIA and also working for Dick Cheney. But he is pretty freaked out about what's going on. He thinks that there's a very real possibility that we could be setting up a nuclear war with Russia. And I share that concern. And so I wanted to get him on, and we'll talk to him. And but to begin with, I mentioned, well, actually, I want to begin with disaster porn. I've been watching. I mean, you can't turn on the TV right now without seeing hurricane porn, right? It's just all the time, and it's like, there's winds out there. There's winds all over the place, but and this storm was a terrible storm, and what it did to the Bahamas is truly horrific. And, now it's going up the East Coast, and that's going to be a problem. I don't think that the going up the East Coast part of it as a Cat 2 necessarily deserves all the coverage it's getting. But the thing that is really missing is any discussion whatsoever about climate change. This storm took out the Bahamas, and frankly, so far the death toll is 7, but, obviously, I mean, you just look at the pictures. Yes, there was an evacuation. I don't know how thorough or comprehensive that evacuation is, but I would say fairly obviously that death toll is going to go up. You'll recall, when Trump went to Puerto Rico, which was the last time we had a Category 5 hurricane, and which he was like, I don't think I've ever even heard of a Category 5 earthquake. That's because you weren't paying attention to what happened to Puerto Rico. But the bottom line is that I think that was Maria, wasn't it? In any case, what nobody's discussing is that this storm would not have been as serious as it was if the waters of the of the Caribbean were not a couple of degrees warmer than they typically are. And this is the clear consequence of climate change. About 90% of the heat that the atmosphere has been holding is ending up in our oceans, and it's bleaching the coral reefs all around the world. The Great Barrier Reef in Australia is nearly dead. This is a serious. This is dramatic climate change that we're watching right in front of us, and yet there's no mention of it. Now, if you turn on European television, and even, just watch the BBC or France 24, right? They're, most cable systems have them, or a lot of them do. Or you can get them online. And they do weather reports, or they'll report on our hurricane. And they just mention in passing, this is being made worse by climate change. The U.S. media does not ever talk about this, or when they do, it's very, very rare. Eric Boehlert had a piece over on Daily Kos this morning or last night, talking about how there's this website that monitors the three cable TV networks, Fox, CNN, and MSNBC, and over 1,000 mentions. I forget the number, but it's well over 1,000 mentions of hurricane, and fewer than 100 mentions of global climate change. And those were probably all limited to MSNBC, and they probably weren't the news shows. So why is that? Why is it that the corporate media in the United States never mentions climate change, particularly in the context of these kinds of disasters, and yet the media of other countries does? Why is it that the media in the United States does not, when there's a mass shooting, does not talk about the clear association, the absolute, this is not even in dispute. The more guns you have, the more killings you're going to have. Period. It's real simple. Why is it that they never mention that? And, we come up with these elaborate conspiracy theories for why this is the case. And, it's the corporate media. And, they share boards of directors with fossil fuel companies and gun manufacturers. Quack, 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 quack. It just hit me this morning when I was putting together we do a little paragraph every day that we put up on Facebook. And I was putting this thing together. Suddenly hit me why the media doesn't talk about climate change in the context of extreme weather, and why they don't talk about the number of guns in the United States in the context of mass shootings and other problems. An article in Newsweek just yesterday or the day before about a woman whose 18-year-old daughter came home from college unannounced and mom shot her. This is like, why don't we discuss this? Well, I think it's because they've been politicized. Now, I realize that sounds kind of, well, what does that mean? But let me explain this. The Republican Party is now wholly owned, or has created an absolute, unshakable, top to bottom, left to right alliance with the fossil fuel industry and the National Rifle Association and the weapons manufacturers that it represents. That is the GOP right now. So the reality of climate change in every other country in the world, now keep in mind, here's the big piece to this whole thing. We are literally the only country on earth that has a political party that says climate change doesn't exist. Or if it does, it's natural and it's irrelevant. We're the only country in the world, the only developed country in the world that has a single political party that thinks that having as many guns in circulation as possible is a good thing. I pointed out yesterday, Greg Abbott signed into law 7 different pieces of legislation the day before, well, they went into effect the day after this most recent shooting in Texas. And so when the media thinks about talking about or reporting on issues that have to do with climate change or that have to do with guns, they don't think of them as, hey, we need to report on science. Or we need, the science of climate change, or the science that shows that more guns, more deaths, more gun deaths. They don't think that. They think instead, the Republicans are all in favor of this. And so if we report the science on this, it seems like we're taking the side of the Democrats. And we don't want to be the ones who are taking the sides of the Democrats, because ever since Lee Atwater, they've been working the refs, right? For 30 years now, the Republicans, 40 years, the Republicans have been yelling and screaming about liberal media bias, to the point that the media in this country is just absolutely gun shy. They're terrified of these Republicans. And by the way, it's true. If the media, I can tell you, clearly it happens, with this program. I talk about climate change, and I get hate mail from people going, oh, you're just pushing the Democrats. No, it's got nothing to do with Democrats. Got to do with climate change or guns. Oh, you're just, you're one of those Democrats who wants to take your guns. No, it's got to do with, this is science. But because these industries have been able to buy a political party with a little help from the Supreme Court, that political party gives cover to these industries. It's this incredible loop. And I don't know the answer. Frankly, I don't know how to convince our media that climate change is not a partisan issue, or that guns are not partisan issues. That these are actual issues that actually deserve some actual, real, whatever you want to call it, serious consideration. But, that's what's going on. Okay, a few other things. I mentioned the economy. Just a couple of things that are worthy of note. U.S. manufacturing just contracted for the first time in several years. This when the manufacturing index is for the Institute for Supply Management, and they do this is the trade association for purchasing managers and companies, people who supervise, getting inventory in and out, whether it's a retail store or whether it's a factory or whatever it may be. And when their purchasing manager's index falls below 50, it means that manufacturing has gone negative, that the inputs, the raw materials needed for manufacturing have dropped, and so manufacturing is going negative. And they went below 50 yesterday. Meanwhile, so that's by the way, that is at the lowest level since 2009. Remember what happened in 2008? It was even lower in 2008. It went back up to this level in 2009. Small business confidence has fallen to the lowest level since 2012. This is from the Wall Street Journal. They write, economic confidence among small firms fell in August to the lowest level since November 2012. This is a survey of 670 small companies for the Wall Street Journal. The portion of respondents that expected the economy to worsen over the next 12 months rose to 40%, compared with 23% a year ago. Consumer confidence has fallen the most in 6 years. This is from Bloomberg. Construction spending just hit a 7-month low. I just noticed walking into work this morning. It's about a mile walk for me. And there's a couple of, just the first 2 blocks, there were 5 houses for sale. It's like everywhere I'm seeing for sale signs. I think people are starting to freak out.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The houses are not selling. People are starting to figure out that Donald Trump has just screwed the economy. We'll be right back. and welcome back. Let's see here. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to answer the question that I've been actually holding on to for about a year now. You asked this morning, why don't we hear from the corporate media any tie-in about or any mention about climate change when we have these obvious events, okay? And I have a very simple answer. First of all, I still call it the oligarch media, which is a worthy thought. But the reason that they don't mention climate change is because our oligarch media are capitalism's mouthpiece. Capitalism equals climate degradation equals stockholder profits or losses. Naomi Klein covers this beautifully in her book, This Changes Everything. And behind Muhammad Ali, Naomi Klein is my 71-year-old number 2 life's hero. So oligarchs are not going to identify the processes by which they make their profits, and they therefore will control the words and the statements of the oligarch media. And it's really just as simple as that.
Could be. At least until it reaches a crisis. I mean, look at the opioid crisis. It wasn't until, 480,000 Americans have died from these products that we started looking at the Sackler family. But that has not been politicized. I'm still convinced that if the Republican Party took the position that, hey, why do the Democrats want to take away your pain medications, that we probably wouldn't be having that debate. I really think it's the political piece of it, Robin. I get the whole oligarch media. I'm with you on that, but I think this goes beyond that.
I think so, but I think the opioid thing is a little bit more narrow than the worldwide environmental collapse and climate change. And again, it's the Republicans are the oligarchs, Tom. There's not many Democratic oligarchs, so we're really using different words to say the same thing.
So maybe
that's why 2 bits.
So, maybe it's a matter of then redefining the Republican Party as the oligarchic party.
Absolutely. How could it not be that, Tom?
Yeah.
How can it not be that?
So
it's exactly what it is.
So let's consider rebranding the GOP Grand Oligarch Party. I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah, but I think there's something to this, Robin. Robin, thanks a lot for the call.
Yeah. No problem.
Yeah, great to hear from you.
Bye.
Sure.
Yeah, bye.
Whoops. Figure out. There we go. I'm learning new buttons here. So, and by the way, just to wrap up the economic stuff in the 19 seconds I have left. Another plant closure, an Indiana manufacturing plant is set to shut its doors, laying off another 160 to 170 workers. This is Robert Christopher. This is from the Northwest Indiana Times. Robert Christopher, a Valparaiso resident who worked on a punch press making helicopter bearings for 8 years, was stunned by the news that the now owner, Regal Beloit, planned to shutter the 109-year-old factory, laying off 160 to 170 workers. So, grim times. Anyhow, we'll be right back. Stick around. It's 22 minutes past the hour. So in Valparaiso, Indiana, a McGill Manufacturing, which makes ball bearings, is shutting down. Continuing with the economic news, they're laying off 160 workers. This seems to be a theme with the Trump administration. A rather substantial theme, in fact. Daily Kos put together a short list on this. This is Walter Einenkel for Daily Kos. And, he starts out, Trump said that he was going to save 1,000 jobs, American jobs over at Carrier. Nah, sorry, the layoffs happened. He was going, his tax breaks to AT&T and Verizon, they've been laying off workers. Oklahoma City, Chesapeake Energy just laid off a couple hundred workers. Tenet Healthcare just laid off 1,300 workers. After the tax breaks, that was before the tax breaks. After the tax breaks, Tenet announced that they would lay off another 2,000 workers. General Motors announced layoffs as well as plant closures back in November. Can you say winning? Yes. Ford announced plans to lay off workers. Pfizer, once they got their tax break, they're cutting scientists' jobs, shutting down entire sections of their research. Harley-Davidson closed down a Kansas City plant. Walmart closed down 60 Sam Club stores in order to keep Trump and the Republicans' winning streak alive, writes Walter Einenkel. Citibank says they could downsize about 10,000 jobs over the next 5 years. J.P. Morgan Chase is laying off hundreds of people. This is all, post-tax cut. Financial institutions got a $21 billion tax cut. Nomura Holdings laying off dozens of people. Deutsche Bank and Commerce Bank are laying off as many as 30,000 people. Goldman Sachs is laying off people. So far, it's just 65 jobs. They're blaming economic factors. Standard Bank Group closing 91 branches across South Africa. This is happening worldwide now. It's just, yeah. Do you feel like you're winning yet? I mean, are we all excited? Fascinating piece over at on CNN's website. Ellie Honig wrote this. And Ellie is a legal analyst and former federal and state prosecutor. Excuse me, he. Ellie says, I'll just share this with you just straight up. This is off CNN's website, CNN.com. As a federal organized crime prosecutor, I learned that the mafia uses a practice known as kicking up or paying tribute to the boss. Essentially, all members of a mafia family must make sure that some of their earnings end up in their boss's pocket. Now, this is, for the underlings, this is a way of currying favor with the boss. For the boss, it's how the boss gets rich. This is how mafia families work. And this is a former federal prosecutor who went after mafia families. And this prosecutor, Ellie Honig, is saying, hey, this is what Mike Pence did when he stayed at Trump's hotel in Ireland. This is what Bill Barr is doing when he's putting $30,000 into Trump's pockets by having his Christmas party at Trump's hotel in Washington, D.C. It's called kicking up. And, and I keep going back to this, for a couple of years now, I have been saying that Trump, in my mind, I look at the way he behaves, the way that he demands complete loyalty, the way that he's willing to break laws, the way that he draws people into, that he's a mafia boss, basically. His role model are mafia bosses. And I'm convinced that's the case. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I have a little more shocking news to pick up on right after the break, and we'll pick up your calls as well. Stick around. Thom Hartmann University Book Club today. We're reading from It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America by David K. Johnston. This is from page 61, the chapter titled Forgetting the Forgotten Man. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Labor created a website to honor workers who died on the job. Quote, more than 4,500 workers, lose their lives on the job every year. Below are the names of just a few who have died in recent months. OSHA's mission is to prevent workplace injuries, illnesses, and death, end quote. That Occupational Safety and Health Administration webpage was intended to highlight and humanize workplace deaths, to ensure awareness of tragedies, especially those that could have been avoided, according to Jordan Barab, an Assistant Secretary of Labor during the Obama administration. Barab explained, without information like this, fatality statistics are just raw, sterile numbers. The purpose of adding names and circumstances was to impress people with the tragedy that workers and their families face day after day. In August 2017, Trump's Labor Department quietly removed the preamble and the names when it killed the web page. It also took down, without public announcement, the fatality inspection data for all years prior to 2017. Those were just two of many other Trump administration actions inimical to worker safety. Others included no longer posting press releases about deaths resulting from unsafe working conditions, delaying rules to reduce sickness and death from inhaling silica and beryllium at work, delaying rules to lower the risk of railroad engineers and truck drivers falling asleep at the switch or wheel because of untreated sleep apnea, and the appointment to the Supreme Court of a judge who held that a company had the right to fire a worker who chose not to freeze to death on the job. A reasonable person listening to Donald Trump's inaugural address would never have expected these and other actions, assuming he believed what Trump said. Trump declared, "The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no more. You came by the tens of millions to become part of a historic movement, the likes of which the world has never seen before. At the center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens," end quote. Those men and women were forgotten again the following week. And it's not just workers whose interests were forgotten, not to mention who were put in danger. By deciding not to implement a rule to reduce the chances of truck drivers and train operators falling asleep at the wheel, Trump put at risk the lives of families driving along the highway, people riding on passenger trains, and many others. The White House called it President Trump's war on regulation. In his weekly radio address in early May, he declared that we've removed one job-killing regulation after another, and they're not pretty, and they're going. And believe me, we're just getting started on regulations. They're gone. Removal of data on workplace deaths, which averaged 13 per day, infuriated Jordan Barab, who was Obama's number 2 at OSHA. As a private citizen, Barab created a web page to keep track of the names of the dead and the reasons they were killed on the job. He called it, "OSHA won't tell you who died in the workplace, we will." After the election, Barab's concerns that the Trump administration would be bad for workers increased when he asked where the Trump beachhead team was and learned that none was coming. Each incoming administrator sends people to scope out federal agencies, learn who does what, and get a feel for the place in advance. Then the incoming administration sends its landing team, the people who will initially implement its policies for each agenda or at each agency. When no beachhead team came up, Barab figured it meant worker safety simply was not a priority for Trump. He hoped that was the worst of it, nothing more than apathy about worker safety. But when the landing team arrived, Barab realized trouble was coming for American workers, and it was not official apathy, but the start of assaults on workers' rights and safety. Barab said most of them had no idea they were going to labor and no interest in workers' issues either. What they did have was a mandate to delay, repeal, or weaken regulations that protected workers, as part of Trump's plan to eliminate, quote, any regulation that is outdated, unnecessary, bad for workers, or contrary to the national interest, end quote. The first sign came when Trump nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Gorsuch was an acolyte of Antonin Scalia, whose seat he would be taking. Like Scalia, he said statutes should be literally read, and if that made no sense, well, that was a problem for Congress. Also like Scalia, he had a habit of consulting dictionaries, often following Scalia's practice of relying on the third, fourth, or even lesser definition of a word when it supported his jurisprudence. Trump's nomination alarmed unions. Jody Calamine, a communications worker of America lawyer, told Gorsuch's Senate confirmation hearing that Gorsuch, quote, is a threat to working people's health and safety, end quote. Calamine cited Gorsuch's dissent in the 2016 case to make his point. That dissent, he said, reveals an anti-worker bias and features the judicial activism that will ultimately put workers' lives at risk, end quote. Those are unusually strong words about a Supreme Court nominee, but a review of the case shows Gorsuch has little regard for human life, at least when it comes to employers' power over their workers. He considers a rigid interpretation of the law more important. The case was about a law Congress passed giving workers the right to refuse dangerous tasks. Gorsuch said, no, you may not refuse. It's even worse than you think, by David K. Johnston.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I've gotten 2 emails now from Donald Trump. Fred, we're 7 days away from the most important congressional election of 2019. Let's see, this is from yesterday. And he's pitching, I'm not even going to say the guy's name, he's pitching a Republican. He says he's a fantastic conservative who has my total endorsement. He's running against a big government socialist handpicked by Nancy Pelosi in the North Carolina 9th District special election. The stakes are high. We need to win. America doesn't need more obstructionist Democrats who will be a rubber stamp for Nancy Pelosi's radical socialist agenda. In order to have the resources we need to win this election, we need to raise $100,000 by midnight tonight. Please contribute $42 by midnight tonight, and your contribution will be instantly double matched to ensure victory in North Carolina. Now, he's not actually saying in this email that the money's going to go to this guy in North Carolina. My guess is the money's going to go to Donald Trump's pocket. But the guy that is the Democrat who is running in that race is Dan McCready. And Dan McCready, this is a special election coming up in North Carolina's 9th Congressional District. It's next Tuesday. And the Republicans are doubling down on this. They are sending Donald Trump. I mean, they're starting to freak out. Panicking Republican Party. Meanwhile, you've got a few more Republicans who have said, enough in Texas. I think they're up to 6 now, Republicans who have just said, we're not going to be there anymore. So anyhow, to pick up your calls here, Linda in California City. Hey, Linda, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First, thank you so much for your show. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'm having fun.
Good. I am too. And it's so important. I want to address messaging. The phrase climate change is too benign. We need to call it something more serious, like global climate disruption. Mm-hmm. I live in a red area of California, and I've tried to talk to lots of people out here about climate disruption and the horrors it could bring, and they don't get it. They say things like climate has always changed. It's no big deal. They don't comprehend the severity. I think we need to change the brand, change the wording.
Yeah, I think climate disruption is a good one, too. The problem is the scientific community has not bought into that. The news media hasn't bought into that. But your point is really well taken, Linda. And I completely agree with you. Thank you very much for the call. Very well said. Joanne in Van Nuys. Hey, Joanne, what's up?
Quickly, I don't know if you are aware of this, but the Trump budget is calling for 18,000 military doctors, surgeons, specialists, nurses to be fired in order to meet his budget and to transfer money. The other thing is, and that's major research hospitals, so that means that these doctors won't be properly trained, etc. The other thing I'd like to bring up and just mention to you...
This is to pay for the wall? Hang on just a second. This is to pay for the wall, Joanne?
Yes.
Where did you get that information? I've seen, this is just starting to leak out here, but I have not seen that specific piece of data.
Oh gosh, I hear it from people who are associated with the Forbes list. They tell me things.
All right. Well, I'll look around. Anyhow,
can I mention this?
Yes.
Can I mention this? Because I want to ask you what you think about this, because it doesn't seem right to me. Northrop Grumman is hiring directly from Henderson Air Force Base these drone players or these drone guys. They retire from the Army, and then they are hired by Northrop Grumman, and they go over to Afghanistan, and they are headquartered in Northrop Grumman there. And they are literally killing people with drones. Now, is that appropriate? Isn't that a mercenary army, so to speak, or a corporate army?
Seems like it.
Is that legal? Is that legal?
Yes, it's legal. Yeah, but whether it's moral or not, whether it's the right thing or not, I mean, the privatization of our military is just one of the real horrors, I think, of the post 9/11 world, and really even the pre 9/11 world. I mean, Blackwater was around before that, but I'm spot on, Joanne. I'm with you. This is something that we all should be, frankly, doing something about. Gary in Baden, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Hello, Thom Hartmann. Thank you once more.
Thank you, Gary. What's up?
You're quite welcome. we need to end this deadlock of our democracy. We need to end this deadlock. We're deadlocked. We're extremely divided. It doesn't have to be this way. So we need to ask the central question again, in my opinion. What kind of country do we want? Face the music, face reality, look ourselves in the mirror. We can't keep blaming these politicians. They deserve a lot of blame. Get out there, at least vote. At least vote this next election. Get them the hell out of there.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, I want to get back to your personal observation about the liar in chief. Although I couldn't agree more with you. I've always said this. He has a crime boss mentality. This is basically, sad to say, at his core. I don't take pleasure saying this. But you still there?
Yeah, I am. I think you're absolutely right, Gary.
So that's my thank you. That's my take, and I like to close with a quote, if I may.
Sure.
It's not mine, but I think it originally came from Aristotle or something. But I think it's relevant. A republic is only as good as the sum of its parts. Period.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good one, Gary. Thank you. I like it. I like it a lot. Arthur in San Miguel, California. Hey, Arthur, what's up?
Oh, I've been trying to contact you for a long time, but anyway,
here we are.
I'm just this thing about Trump. I knew he was a crook before he got in there. That's why I didn't vote for him. And every time I get a chance I vote by mail. And that ensures that I get to vote every time there's a vote to be got. And I will not vote for anybody that I don't trust. Anyway, this thing about climate change, well, it's the climate disaster. I listen to free speech television, and they actually address this totally on free speech TV. And I got lucky. I got Section 8 housing here, and as my landlady has the dish TV and Wi-Fi, and so I died and gone to heaven here almost. You know.
Yeah. Well, that's good, Arthur. I'm glad you're getting the information you need, and I agree with you. Climate change is a screaming disaster, and a real one. Lawrence in Marina, California. Hey, Lawrence, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. You were talking earlier about rebranding the Republican Party,
right?
As
the greedy oligarch party.
Right. I got a better brand for them.
Okay.
It works with Moscow Mitch.
Okay.
And it's the Republicans. They would be called the Soviet Republicans.
Okay.
With Moscow Mitch.
The Soviet Republicans. All right. I like it.
Yeah,
Lawrence,
that's all I got.
Okay. Lawrence, thanks a lot. Great to hear from you. Marcia in, there we go. Marcia in Tustin, California. Hey, Marcia, what's up?
Right. I would like your take on a conservative talking point. Mm-hmm. Whenever people bring up the fact that other countries have free this and that education and health care, they always say, well, yeah, but the population is a lot smaller. And I'd like your take on that. Does it really make a difference?
No. It doesn't. Actually, the larger the population, the easier it is to administer a system, and the less likely the system is to be disrupted by the occasional person who gets really, really sick. This is the problem that Vermont had. Vermont actually passed legislation for a single-payer health care system. It was signed by the governor, and they tried to put it into place, but they only have 600,000 people in Vermont. And so if you get 20 or 30 people who are, costing $1 million a year because they got some really serious illness or heart, transplants or whatever, it wipes out the system. So the larger the population, the easier it is to do a national health care system. And the smaller the population, the more difficult it is. So there's your simple answer, Marcia. Hope that helps.
Great. That's wonderful. No, I just want to thank you. I've listened to you ever since the Bush debacle started. Okay. So thanks for all you're doing.
You're welcome. Thank you, Marcia. It's great to hear from you. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm learning a new phone system here, and it drops people a little faster than I'm used to. So if you get cut off in mid-sentence or something, my apologies. I'll have this figured out by the end of the day. Robbie in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Robbie, what's up?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey,
well, it sounds like you're talking from the bathroom, but I can hear you.
Can you hear me now? I'm out of the elevator.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So basically, I wanted to bring up. You said that there is only one party that's, climate change deniers.
Entirely.
What about Bolsonaro? Bolsonaro, though. He's the rainforest empire. That would be a far right-wing party I would consider that has done the same.
Yeah, I don't know if Brazil is part of the OECD or not.
Let me get beyond that. I wanted to bring up something else.
Okay.
I wanted to bring some information to your listeners. I tried saying this on the show before. You said it was politicized and it wasn't like a conspiracy, but basically that's the definition of a conspiracy, is whenever there's individuals who are working together, lying to other people, deceiving them, all for one particular agenda or goal. That's what that was. And so what I want to bring up to your listeners is a lot of people don't realize this, but the only difference between China and America is the fact that China has come forward to their people saying that they can control the weather. A lot of people don't know this, but the Beijing Weather Modification Office has the Wikipedia. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can, and yes, they did. They seeded clouds before the Olympics, to keep the weather from going there, and I got it. I didn't think that was a secret. We've been doing that for years here too, by the way, and we don't do it routinely though. They did it for the Olympics. But anyhow, we'll continue with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Oh, and Betsy DeVos is up to a whole brand new set of tricks. I got to tell you about that, too. It's if you have a student loan, it's really grim news. And welcome back. Lisa in Sutherland, Oregon. Hey, Lisa, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you today?
I am well. Could you either take me off speakerphone or get your mouth closer to the microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking up this article in The Guardian. I can't find it. But I read that Ron Wyden is investigating the company, the Jordan Cove Project, and the Canadian company now called Pembria or something, for coming after citizens for protesting. They actually wrote legislation to put us in jail for protesting the pipeline, and also fining us for 20 years and fining us for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, these pipeline companies have been lobbying, and Republicans have been proposing legislation like this, and I think that at least one state already has it. But continue, Lisa.
This is what concerns me. First of all, this is a direct violation of the First Amendment, number one, and also a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment, which is the right to privacy and unfair searches and seizures, because the companies have files. They are working. This foreign companies working in cooperation with the FBI and a local so-called law enforcement they put files together on the protesters. And Ron Wyden has referred this case to the federal assistant attorney general, who I believe is under William Barr.
Yes.
The so-called
all your federal
general.
prosecutors work for Bill Barr. Yes.
Right. So I am very concerned that although Ron Wyden looks like he's protecting us, that assistant attorney general is with the whole administration in bed with the fossil fuel industry. So I called the Oregon attorney general. I believe her name is Ellen something or other. I'm sorry, I'm details. And I asked if it is her jurisdiction to protect the people of Oregon against a foreign company that is violating two of our constitutional rights. And I was told I was abruptly cut off.
Yeah.
And I said, I need to post this on Facebook, her reaction to this, whether she is going to help us or whether she's going to just
Well, I'm
let
guessing this
fly.
wasn't the AG's reaction. This was the reaction of the person who answers the phone at the AG's office, right?
Yes, the staff member, apparently she didn't understand what I was talking
I'm guessing that was the case because a lot of these staffers that, in political offices like this, they're just entry-level positions, or in some cases they're even interns. And
yes, I know a lot of them are young. But the most important point here is that my life is on the line here. If I get arrested for protesting, and I'm sure they have a file going back to my first Vietnam War protest in 1971 or whatever it was, I can't remember, and all of my protests for my entire life, they've got a big file on me. So I want to see that file. And what I'm concerned about at my age with my health issues, if they arrest me, I will die in prison.
Yeah.
Okay? This is a matter of life and death.
Well, Lisa, geez, I doubt that the Oregon AG is going to help you with this, but, it might be worth contacting your member of Congress.
Well, I contacted them all.
Yeah.
But,
okay. Lisa, I got to run. I'm sorry. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a quick reminder at the top of the hour, or 6 minutes after the top of the hour, Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us for the whole next hour, taking your calls. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Betsy DeVos. This I mentioned this just before the break. I want to share with this with you. In last year, in 2018. 127,000 students people who had student loans filed with the federal government to have those loans basically set aside. Because literally 98% of that 127,000 people had student loans from for-profit colleges who had ripped them off. Just like Trump University. It's like one of the biggest scams going. And this is a program that President Obama put into place. They have so far forgiven $222 million in student loans from over 20,000 borrowers since Obama started this program in 2016. Betsy DeVos just kneecapped it. She said that now, if you want to get your student loans vacated, even if the school has gone bankrupt, you have to prove that they intended to rip you off. Right? Which is like, who could afford that, right? I mean, you've got to hire like a major law firm to go in and basically charge that. I mean, it's nuts. This is just more, the clueless billionaire in the education department, or not clueless, I'd say malicious, actually, in this case. They're just students. These are just student loans. Anyhow, David in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
What's become obvious to me, you posed the question earlier about why the word isn't getting out. About climate change, and I think there's a core problem here, and that would be when the media doesn't want to lie to your face because of pushback. What they do is they lie by omission and don't cover the story at all. And I think it's a dumbing down of this entire country. All you have to do is watch the commercials on TV to see how far we've slipped.
Yeah, well, all you have to do is watch the so-called news. There's stuff going on all over the world that is of major consequence, not the least of which is that, we just had what's probably going to end up to be hundreds or thousands of people die, and certainly, billions of dollars worth of property damage in the Bahamas as a consequence of a climate disruption fueled hurricane. And this
is going to kill us all, though.
It's not being covered as such.
If we allow this to go on, and that the left-leaning MSNBC is guilty of this also.
Yeah, no, this is a problem right across the board with the media. And David, as I said, I think this is because the Republicans, to a person, deny climate change. This is an entire political party. It's a political party that goes back 150 years or more. And this political party is saying, no, there's no such thing as climate change. Robbie pointed out Bolsonaro, but I don't know that there's an entire political party in Brazil that's denying climate change, or anywhere else, to the best of my knowledge. I've seen this at least a half a dozen times in different places, that the Republican Party in the United States is literally the only political party in the world that takes this position, and I'm inclined to believe it. Viana in Lancaster, California. Am I saying your name right?
Yes, that's perfect. My second time to call. I'm 78 years old. I go to rallies all the time.
Oh,
I
great.
can't sit at home.
Thanks for listening to KPFK, too.
Under.
So what's up?
I wanted you to know about gun control. Do you know where guns are banned?
Well, what do you mean by banned?
Guns are banned at the NRA conventions and gun shows. They are banned in those places.
Right. You're absolutely
I wondered
right.
if you knew that.
Yeah, I did.
I think that's funny.
Yeah, I did too, and we talked about this last year when the NRA had their convention. It is. It's pretty weird. Yeah, Vienna, thank you for the call. Spot on. Spot on. Let's see here. I've got Joliet, Illinois. I don't have a name though. I'm sorry. What's your name? Okay.
John Chandler.
Yeah. Hey, John, you're on the air. What's up?
I'm actually in Morris, Illinois.
Okay.
But I got a T-shirt here that says, suddenly in an instant, this is Isaiah 29:6, the Lord Almighty will come with thunder and with earthquakes and great noise, with windstorms and with tempest, which is hurricanes, and flames of devouring fire. That's in Isaiah 29:6.
Yeah. So you think that we're living in the end times? Is that your take on this?
No, it's not. No, we're not living in the end times. This is a wake-up notice. Mm-hmm. Climate change is a wake-up, and the people that deny it are antichrist, even if they call themselves Christians.
Okay, I am not disagreeing with you at all. Joanna in Davis, California. Hey, Joanna, what's up?
Hey, yeah, I'm actually in Los Angeles, California.
Okay.
I'm just calling. You mentioned that there's one party that's the party of climate deniers. But what about the Democratic Party when they refuse to hold a climate debate for candidates going into the presidential election?
That's a whole different thing from being climate deniers. And I disagree with the decision, but it was made by a democratic process. The DNC, about a third of the people in the DNC voted in favor of it. About 2/3 voted no. And I think that and what I've heard is that they didn't want to establish a precedent of having single issue debates, and that they don't want to define the party as a single issue party. But I think it's tonight on CNN. You're having, they're doing this thing where they're doing these climate town halls all across the country. So, Joanna, thanks for the call. That's not, though, a political party denying climate change. It is not at all, not even close. Up next, Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Stick around. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America by Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. We've been talking about Betsy DeVos ripping off students, making it harder and harder for you to not have to pay your student debt if you've been ripped off by a for-profit college. We've been talking about the economy. We've been talking about climate change in the media. We'll continue those conversations in an hour. But right now, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour. It's Wednesday. It's midweek. It's midday. It's middays with Mark. Congressman Pocan is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the great state of Wisconsin, the 2nd District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Pocan.house.gov, Pocan.house.gov is the website. His Twitter handle is Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Oh, Tom, thanks so much. Glad to be here.
It is super having you on every week. It is just great. So I understand Moscow Mitch has an owie.
So, I think, a lot of news comes out every week, and your listeners always are on top of all of it. But this is one that I just think it's worth reinforcing. Moscow Mitch, with all he's doing to stop simple bills to try to protect our elections, is really offended and signaling he's offended by the nickname Moscow Mitch. He claims it's over the top. He's having all sorts of issues, claims he's a warrior, the Cold War warrior, and yet here he is doing the president's bidding by not taking up anything to actually protect our elections, especially all the things that were outlined in the Mueller report. So I just think people need to keep it up. It's clearly working. It's bugging him. And if it's bugging him, it's because he knows he's doing the wrong thing. And we need to at least have we've passed several measures to the Senate on this specifically, but there's one that there's really no reason anyone should oppose that would protect our elections. And I think we need to keep the pressure on.
Yeah, there's a political action committee. I believe they're unique to Kentucky that's called Mad Dog PAC. Their logo is a bulldog. Okay. And they have bought billboards all over the state that say Moscow Mitch. Just Moscow Mitch with a giant picture of Mitch McConnell. And he is freaking out because billboards are really, really effective for political advertising. So anyhow, you're with us for the hour taking our listeners' calls. The number here is 202-808-9925. And let's just get started, all right?
Sure.
Okay, Jim in Los Angeles. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Yeah, it's oligarchs own Republicans. And Congressman, I suggested legislation to go in and search, just barge into every. The legislation will take too long. We must charge them with crimes, with negligent homicide, with kidnapping, and with torture. The U.S. is torturing parents and children. The USA, you and I, are torturing children. Find the parents for standing and go in with warrants. Find a DA in every state. Start with the corporate headquarters and go into every detention center in this country with warrants and with doctors and nurses and cameras and gather evidence. And it has to be done. Can you please initiate it? Start the first one off.
Yeah, Jim, I single-handedly cannot do something like that, but I agree that we do need to do even more than we've been doing on the detention centers. A lot of members of Congress have gone and visited, especially in the last couple months, these facilities. We saw just at the Homestead facility in Florida alone that had 2,700 people earlier this year, now has 0. But they were holding kids at $750 a day for a very long time until they got a good review, and then suddenly they could place people. Go figure, right? But the conditions in these facilities varies greatly. Just in the last week, we saw congressional staff who work for oversight committees were turned down visiting some of these facilities. None of that is acceptable. So we have to hold them accountable in every possible way, and if they're not letting us in, we have to then send more people more often until they get the hint that they can't get away with the practices that are inhumane that have gone on far too long under this president with these facilities.
Danny in Tell City, Indiana. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Mr. Pocan. The question is, as in 2008, 2009, the federal banks, commercial banks were gambling and caused the debacle or crash, whatever you want to call it. And I'm recently told that they poked holes in this Volcker rule, and they're doing it again. Is that true?
And there have been some changes around derivatives and a couple other areas. It's not nearly as extensive as 2008, but they're also busy doing things like stopping the watchdog office that we put in place and not having the oversight that if we have oversight, we can get ahead of this. If not, we could wind up with a slippery slope of bad practices. So I think some of that's the egregious steps that we've seen under this administration.
Omar in Herndon, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good day to you, Mr. Pocan and Tom. Just really quick, a friend of mine was in Louisville, and he was part of a group that heckled Mitch McConnell, and they called him Moscow Mitch, and they said his face turned red. Absolutely. So his face was just red. So he does not like that terms at all. But what I wanted to talk about, Mr. Pocan, is that, prior to Paul Ryan's departure, he was meddling with Social Security. He was talking about different things that he wanted to do. Trump also was looking at changing Social Security. Do we have any legislation there right now to strengthen, to prevent Social Security being taken over by these greedy Wall Street, these banksters like Jamie Dimon from Chase?
Yeah, so let me answer it in two different ways, Omar. One, yes, there is a piece of legislation that actually strengthens Social Security for many. John Larson from Connecticut is the author, and Progressive Caucus, we've been helping promote that bill. I believe it just had a hearing before we left for break, and it might be even up for a committee vote in September. But I forget the name of the bill right now. I apologize, but John Larson from Connecticut has it. It might just be as simple as strengthening Social Security. But secondly, though, with them not in charge of the House, there's no way we're going to do anything that's going to weaken Social Security. So even though Paul Ryan, part of his Ayn Rand, growing up, he wanted to go ahead and do a lot of things to Social Security, and the Republicans in the Senate and the President still would, they can't with us there. And that is why it's so important to have the House of Representatives, even more important if we can get the White House and the Senate. But we at least have a goalie in place on that. But I would love to see us put better, more proactive legislation like John Larson's, and I think people should really get behind that.
Judd in Las Vegas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, how you doing today?
Good, Judd. How are you?
I'm a little... Okay. I'm a truck driver. I'm out on the road here. I was concerned about that, the student loan thing you were talking about, because I went to University of Phoenix back in the early 2000s, and I got signed up just a couple years ago where I'm no longer paying my payment. They've got me set up with a company called Fed Loan, and that sounded kind of similar to what you're talking about. And I'm wondering, is this going to affect people who are already, working towards, their loans being forgiven or what have you?
Judd, I don't know for sure, but let me just toss this to Congressman Pocan. The news reports are that Betsy DeVos has erected really, really high barriers for students who have been ripped off by for-profit colleges. President Obama put this into place in 2016. If you went to a for-profit college and they went out of business and you still have student debt, and they were a scam like Trump University, then the federal government covers it. And we've paid off $222 million worth of student loans. And Betsy DeVos has now said, in order for you to qualify for that, you must prove in a court of law that the company intentionally defrauded you.
Right. Yeah, and so I am guessing a number of committees, but I'm hoping that my subcommittee, the Labor, Human Services, and Education Subcommittee on Appropriations, will take this up when we get back and have a hearing, because clearly that's unacceptable. That's not what the intent of the law change was. And, these are some of the most predatory organizations that barely had an educational product, but they are really good at getting federal dollars, especially people who served in the military. They're really good at getting people to take out big loans, and then obviously many people didn't get what they were promised. So call your member of Congress, Judd, to make sure that they're working for you on your individual case, and we'll work on the big picture through our committees in D.C.
There we go. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. His website is pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Your questions for Congressman Pocan right after this. And welcome back. Dee in Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, I wanted to ask about Alaska. Sorry, all of a sudden I'm nervous. Basically, Alaskans are concerned about a Russian floating nuclear plant that's going to be docked about 1,200 miles from the Anchorage, Alaska. It's called, it's been dubbed Chernobyl on ice. And also, I live in Washington State, so I saw about 800 tanks go to a dock that was heading to Korea. And when I checked it out, people didn't know which Korea. This happened about 15 months ago. People didn't know which Korea it was going to. And frankly, the military didn't seem to know the end destination. They just knew it was Korea. I mean, we got Russia parking near Alaska. We got military tanks. 800.
I can guarantee you, Dee, the tanks were going to South Korea. But Congressman Pocan, your thoughts on Russia putting a nuclear reactor on a barge and floating it out into the Arctic Sea?
Yeah, I haven't seen that. It sounds
it's true. It's actually happening.
Crazy, is it?
Yeah.
I haven't. Okay, I have not seen that article. Again, part of our problem is when we don't decide to ever hold Russia accountable under this White House for anything they do. I don't expect Donald Trump to suddenly tell Vladimir Putin he's doing something wrong now, because he hasn't over interfering with our elections or anything else. But clearly, to me, it reminds me when I was at high school and college with the MX missile system, right? When you're putting dangerous things on various, mobile platforms, that certainly didn't make you any more secure. And putting something like that out there seems like a really terrible idea, given just in the last month we know they had an explosion with, we're not sure if it had nuclear capacity or not in Russia, and we can't really get information on that either. So it would be something that should be very troubling to everyone.
Yeah, amen. Mark in Houston, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Congressman Pocan. Hello, this is Thom Hartmann. I'm a first-time caller, and I had a question concerning students who graduated for none of the for-profit schools. I graduated 22 years ago, and I graduated in architectural engineering and civil engineering. And I've yet to even find a job in my area. And when you go out on the construction site, you see a lot of the illegals working. And I have $400,000 in student loans. I can't even see them.
Whoa, 400,000.
I'm right now.
So, Mark, what's your question for Congressman Pocan?
And are there any bills or legislation for people like us who did not attend for proper school?
Oh, okay. Yeah, got it. Congressman?
Yeah, Mark, there has been a lot of discussion, especially with the presidential campaign, on student debt forgiveness, and there's probably a number of different proposals right now, so that's something to look at. It has become more of a conversation. The difficulty is, I think, with the private for-profit colleges, they were, in many cases, outright scams, and people were, by all considerations, ripped off. It is a little different if you have a degree from, maybe a real university, and just then there wasn't a job in your field. We probably have that a lot with a lot of different people in their majors, but I don't know, other than dealing with it more holistically, how we could maybe specifically tailor something to a situation like yours.
We're pretty much the only country in the world where if you go to a public college, you can end up so in debt that you can't start a family or buy a home. I mean, we need to fix that, don't we?
Well, especially the public university side. I mean, our debt-free college proposal deals with more than just tuition, with all expenses, and that's a good route.
That's great. We'll be right back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Members of, supporters of our program. And welcome back, Congressman Mark Pocan, taking your calls for the hour. And Mike in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Mike?
Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. Thanks for taking the call. Congressman Thom had mentioned the billboard and the Moscow Mitch situation in his state. And I've often wondered why the progressive Democrats, because it would seem to be relatively inexpensive, didn't rent or purchase billboards across various states that would put up the progressive Democrat message, whether it's like Medicare for all or something like, I'm sure you could fashion a cogent way of expressing it, but it's something people go by every day. I go by numerous billboards, and I would read them again and again. I think a lot of people would get educated that way. And I'm wondering if you would consider doing that.
I'm with Mike.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's different uses of the billboards. I think something like Moscow Mitch, you're trying to brand something that's simple. I was a public relations major. You have to have, 5 to 7 words at most on a billboard so that people can actually read it. Moscow Mitch is understandable. Just putting Medicare for all up, I don't know, if that says much about what we're trying to with that. But I do think, and this is a good way, just like sometimes we use Twitter to get a reporter who's following to maybe write something, there are ways to generate stories relatively easily, and doing those billboards certainly has generated that story in Kentucky, and that's a smart and effective use of probably not all that many dollars compared to what we often spend on TV, trying to do a lot of advertising where consultants make a lot of money. So I don't disagree, Mike. I think it's something we could use more often. I think you do have to use it in the right way, because you can't convey a lot on a billboard, but you can certainly brand something like Moscow Mitch pretty easily.
And it's a brand that's sticking. Denise in Calumet, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, thanks, Tom. Congressman Pocan, my question is about how Donald Trump is spitting in the face of the American people with this emoluments clause. He is just, it seems like he's just stacking his pockets with money with all his motels and all the security that the taxpayers have to pay for him to have. And this thing with Pence out in Ireland now brings it even more into our face. What can be done?
Yeah, this is part of what Judiciary Committee and is looking at directly, but many of us have brought this up for a while, our concern about the Trump Hotel in D.C. and all the, especially foreign governments, getting rooms there. You watched the Attorney General book the hotel for a party. You watched Mike Pence stay at a resort while he's in Europe, going out of his way to stay at a resort. You watched the president talk about the G7. I mean, this is wrong. This is why you have an emoluments clause, so a president can't profit off of their service as president, and yet he flaunts the use of that. So I think their committee is raising the profile through the process they have. We all need to keep talking about it, and I would hope that even people who might be undecided moving forward in a presidential race would find any president who does this and makes money so flagrantly against what the law is. That has to have a negative impact, and I think we just need to keep talking about it.
Shannon in Denver, Colorado. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, are you there?
We're here.
Yes, Shannon, we're here.
Yeah. I'm talking about a Supreme Court decision that happened in December of 2018. It had to do with a woman, Nelson, v. People. It was out of Colorado, again, went to the United States Supreme Court. Basically, she had to prove that she was innocent, and the Supreme Court said that's unconstitutional. Why should we have to prove our innocence against the state?
I don't know anything about the case you're talking about, so I'm not able to probably give you a good answer on it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that either. Ron in Lake Comanche, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, Tom. Hi, Mark. I love you, man. You're a truth sayer and you're a truth seeker. Listen, we've been going to Antarctica for about 90 years to get information, and it's about time that we deploy everything. Air cars, electric cars, hydrogen cars. We need to eliminate all of the carbon that's coming out of the tailpipes for everybody in the world right now. That's how I feel.
Okay, Congressman.
Yeah, Ron, I think, many states have been leading where we are right now with Donald Trump, obviously, in the White House. But, Barack Obama tried to get us closer to making sure we had that as a goal. The president now, Donald Trump, has turned that back. You've got states like California and others trying to be more aggressive. But I agree with you. I mean, we have a Volt as one of our cars, and there's no reason that we can't be moving to that technology more quickly and more efficiently. And just the amount of money we invest in energy research in this country at the federal level is about, I believe, a third. The last time I looked at what we spend on NASA, we really need to expand on that greatly, because this is something that is a crisis, and we need to put some real effort and real resources and look at things like you're talking about to get just there.
Do you think that Congress is, is there any possibility of anything before the elections?
We've got our appropriations process that's coming up. There's some, although because the Senate hasn't done a single thing, it's probably going to be messy again. Continuing a resolution, a few people in leadership doing an omnibus bill up or down. The timeline is between now and the end of the year. I think it's going to be hard to see anything happen next year unless there's great consensus. And in this issue, the oil companies and others own the Republican Party. So we've got a short window if there is.
There you go. Okay, we'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark. We'll be back. Our selection today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is This Land, How Cowboys, Capitalism, and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. This is from Chapter 1. It's about halfway through the chapter. He's talking about Bernard DeVoto. DeVoto was the first major historian of the West who was also an environmentalist and an activist, the first chronicler of what Wallace Stenger called the West's curious desire to rape itself. DeVoto was a Westerner raised in Utah. He suffered in the provincialism and intolerance of Mormon country went east to study and then teach at Harvard, settled in Cambridge, but never forgot the beauty of his native ground. Loving the land and history, said a magazine profile, but loathing the society. His histories, novels, criticism, his essays in Harper's Magazine where for 20 years he wrote the oldest column in American journalism, Easy Chair, pointed always west. His trilogy, published in the 1940s, The Year of Decision, Across the Wide Missouri, and The Course of Empire, garnered the Pulitzer, the Bancroft, and the National Book Award. Widely celebrated, DeVoto used his position to become his generation's most outspoken defender of the public lands. He called the West a plundered province, a resource colony for corporations and absentee landlords who practiced, quote, an economy of liquidation. He was broad in his assault on the liquidators. He went after the timbermen, the mining companies, the stockmen, the cattle barons, the oilmen and gasmen, the overgrazers, the deforesters, the denuders, the profiteers of gold rushes and grass rushes. He named the bankers and congressmen who abetted the plundering, the Western hogs, he called them. They've been busy for a century laying waste to the West. Long before the public domain was vested with any permanence legally in the hands of the American people, before there was a consideration of the land itself or any environmental ethic, the West had been torn up, beaten down, subjected to the greed and profligacy of the commodity users. Ironically, the users, in their race to liquidate, helped drive the creation of the public land system we know today, as they proved the need for federal stewardship to stop their abuses. Massive timber frauds in the 19th century, the largest land frauds seen in the West, led directly to the establishment of the Forest Service in the 20th century, its purpose to stop deforestation. Out-of-control cattle numbers in the steppe, overgrazing that turned the fragile soil to dust, led directly to the federal grazing regulatory system that eventually became the BLM. When in 1946 the commodity users conspired to destroy the public land system, the system in which DeVoto saw the only hope for Western conservation and preservation, he stood to oppose them. Quote, he was the first conservationist in nearly half a century, except for Franklin D. Roosevelt, to command a national audience, said Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., a student of his at Harvard. No one did more in the post-war years to rouse public opinion against the spoilers than DeVoto. DeVoto and Schlesinger had seen firsthand what unregulated industry could wreak in the arid lands when they drove cross-country together in the spring of 1940 and entered western Kansas past the 100th meridian. These were the last years of the Dust Bowl before FDR's soil conservation programs and the return rains of the 40s could heal the land. Wrote DeVoto, a cemetery was 10 inches deep in sand. Half the headstones had toppled into it and been partly covered. Sagging shacks that had been farmhouses had their windows blown out and dust was 4 or 6 feet deep against their western walls and a foot deep against the far wall. A repulsive dust as fine as sifted flour. Now, 6 years after that trip with Schlesinger, DeVoto was confronted with the West's cattle barons, the liquidators of the grass, who were hell-bent on reducing the region to the same mess of dust. In 1946, the Joint Committee on Public Lands of the American National Livestock Association met in Salt Lake City to discuss the goal of undermining what few regulations had been placed on livestock operators under the newly formed Bureau of Land Management. The stock growers' ambition went further than mere deregulation. They hatched a plan with the help of friends in Congress to begin moving all federal land, the BLM and Forest Service domain, as well as the national parks, into the control of the states. The plan evolved through 1946, 47, 48, with legislation making its way on Capitol Hill. DeVoto covered the story for Harper's. He cautioned that the stock growers were attempting, quote, one of the biggest land grabs in American history. The public lands are first to be transferred to the states on the wholly justified assumption that there should be a state government not wholly compliant to the desires of stock growers. It could be pressured into compliance, he wrote in Harper's. Nothing in history suggests the states are adequate to protect their own resources or even want to, or suggest that cattlemen and sheepmen are capable of regulating themselves even for their own benefit, still less the public's, end quote. The long-term plan, he said, was to get rid of the public lands altogether, to place the common possession of the American people into private hands. The livestock industry went on the attack. mounted a PR campaign to discredit Devoto, and pressured Harper's to cease its support. Unmoved, the magazine continued for 3 years to publish his relentless exposés of the intrigues in the state houses and in the Western Caucasus. Devoto had convinced the editors, when no other publication that mattered in the East cared, that the threat of such land transfer was an existential one. This Land by Christopher.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. And Dan in Huntington Park, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom.
Hey,
My
Dan.
question for Congressman Pocan is, has he ever considered legislation that would reassign the United States Department of Justice to the judicial branch of our government?
I can answer that easy. No, I haven't thought about it before, Dan. It's the first time I've heard it posed. I'd have to think about it a little bit. I mean,
that would require a constitutional amendment, I think, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's not an easy task, and I think you have to look at a little bit at the goals you're trying to accomplish and what other agencies under DOJ may not belong to DOJ in that structure. So I guess, Dan, I haven't looked at it, but I haven't thought about it.
Interesting. Barbara in Bellevue, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes. Hi. I'd like to hear Congressman's comments about the article that I read in today's paper. Secretary of Defense SB has approved diverting funds from military construction spending to pay for the border wall, $3.6
billion.
3.6 billion, sorry, with the comment that those funds will be backfilled. So, in essence, we're paying double. Doesn't anyone see this bait and switch? Your comments. Thank you.
Barbara, thank you so much for raising that. I've got some local reporters saying this is one of the issues we're going to talk about, because on that list were some housing facilities for soldiers in Wisconsin that could potentially be part of that money that's going to go inside to the wall. But it's not true that that'll be backfilled, because Congress has to do that. We allocated the money and they've stolen it, and the Department of Defense says they still need that money for those programs, but the president just stole it for a wall, and we don't have additional dollars to backfill it. So that's not true. And instead, what's going to happen is those priorities that had to have happened that the military said they need, including at Fort McCoy in Wisconsin, if it makes the list, and we should get the actual final list today, is not going to happen, because the president, instead of having Mexico is paying for it, now he's having soldiers paying for it. And that, again, is not what we were promised. So it is not true that that money will still get backfilled and those projects will happen. So I think once that list comes out today, a lot of us are going to be talking about this in our districts, what we're losing money for, so that the president continue his folly.
Might the Republicans not simply add that to the next defense appropriations bill and thereby, as she pointed out, kind of essentially getting around the whole thing?
No, because we've already done that bill out of the House. The Senate hasn't yet. Actually, I take it back. They have. They've done their authorization. So we've both done the authorizations, I believe now. I'd have to look at it.
So it has to wait 2 years then, right? It's every 2 years you do military appropriations, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not as easy as them saying, oh, yeah, they're just going to backfill it, because that's going to be new funds. Where's that going to come from? So, once again, the president's not offering all the truth. Go figure. I know you're shocked. But in this case, it's going to be across the country. I think half the money was in the United States, half was overseas. But, on the original list of potentials was the money that we had for improve the barracks at Fort McCoy, and that means people who are in our volunteer army instead are going to have crappy facilities, so that the president, instead of having Mexico pay for his wall, can try to justify his folly. And I think we really need to keep talking about this. So, Barbara, thank you so much for bringing this subject up.
Brilliant. Ann, there we go. Ann in Maryville, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. I know you were raised and born in Michigan, and it's actually Mayville. It's a little village, actually. And hi, Congressman Pocan. Thank you for listening to me. I am very nervous, so please understand. And I have a long story, but I'm going to make it short. I got injured at the end of March at work, and I called up workman's comp number, and they, took all the information down. It took 5 days for them to get, approval for urgent care. I got injured on Monday, then went in on Friday. And what happened is that they kept me out of work. I went under workman's comp. Every week, the nurse would call me up and ask me, "Are you in pain?" And I would tell her yes.
And if I may interrupt you, what's your question for Congressman Pocan?
I have done whatever I could. I called Congress, I called the Senate, I called the state. I want to do more. It's not retaliation.
So what's your question?
My question is, what else can I do? Not just write my senator or my Congressman Mitchell, who's
to
a
get
Republican.
your workman's comp claim handled appropriately?
No. I don't want anybody to step in because I've already stepped in for that. I want to know what I can do to let people know how difficult it is. I'm 66. I've worked for this company 20 years, and I expected better.
Oh, and they're fighting you. Okay, I got it, Ann. Let's let Congressman go answer this.
Yeah, so I think, and I'm just making sure I'm saying this correct to you, Ann. I believe the state of Michigan is running that workman's comp, just like in the state of Wisconsin. I believe we run through a board, the unemployment comp, workman's comp. So it is likely an issue that you need to take to your state representative, your state senator, governor, lieutenant governor, to try to have them address why it took them so long to get it resolved, to get you in the door even on something like that. But I think that's where your fight probably is, so I would start with it there.
Yeah. Gail in Antelope, California, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. I have a question I wanted to ask you. I watched a program the other night, and it was a psychologist basically giving an evaluation that some 27 psychologists had come to, and they said that basically they came to 3 conclusions: that, Trump is erratic, that he's becoming more erratic, and that he will eventually become uncontainable. So my question is if he is defeated in the election, and he absolutely says, "I'm not leaving, this whole thing is bogus, it's fake, I'm staying in office, and what are you going to do about it?" What exactly happens at that point? I know it's a constitutional crisis, but what does that mean? Do you send the big bad bull?
Yeah, you're right on that. And I think it's one of those hypotheticals. I don't know if we've quite got to to figure out. I do think, just based on some of the stuff we got from the Mueller report, that there are some people within, still in the upper administration within the White House that care about the country more than the cult leader, Donald Trump, that seems to be, the Republican Party these days seems to be a cult of Donald Trump. And I think that, one, it would be a pretty big step for him to do that, even though I agree, the narcissism and other things are pretty obvious within how he operates. But I do think that we would have some safety layers to make sure that wouldn't happen. But the fact that we even have to have a serious conversation about this shows how poorly off we are right now in this country with this guy as our president.
Gabriel in Lamar, Colorado. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. My question is kind of an old question. My wife was a teacher in Wisconsin, and her union was stripped, as well as the public works union, but the police union was not stripped of their rights to organize, basically. And I always thought it was kind of like pretty much against the law to do that. Wouldn't you think so?
Yeah, well, Gabriel, I can tell you, I was around when we had those attacks on public employees in Wisconsin. Scott Walker did not go after police and fire, I think because those are hard public employees to go after because of the safety sort of aspect that they cover. But I'll tell you, our firefighters and police stood out in trying to be there in unity with all public employees. In fact, our firefighters became very hyper-political during that time, and were there every single day as we had 40,000 protesters, 100,000 plus on the weekends during that time. Firefighters were front and center. So I do think that they didn't ask for it. It was something Scott Walker did to try to save a little face. He didn't win much by doing that, and what we've learned from this is it was a political move. It wasn't because there was any reason to go after it. They just wanted to destroy unions, thinking they could destroy the Democratic Party. And guess what? That's why Scott Walker's not governor anymore. And, hopefully, as we fix some of the gerrymandering around the country, we can fix some of these state and local laws that have hurt our public employees from being able to organize and have a voice in their workplace.
Kevin in Portland. We have a minute and a half to a hard break here, Kevin. Quick question for Congressman Pocan.
We are currently adding CO2 into the atmosphere at least an order of magnitude greater than was released during the worst mass extinction of all time. For any primate with ears, what makes you think you'll survive that?
Okay.
Yeah, Kevin, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm part of the group that's saying we need a Green New Deal and other things. So that is a great question, though, I think, for politicians who won't support us doing something extremely substantive in the very near future, because we very likely may be past that point of being able to unravel what's unfortunately happened. So I hear what you're saying, although I think I might say it slightly differently than you in order to try to be more effective with someone whom you could possibly persuade.
We just have 50 seconds here, 40 seconds. Yeah. How is the Pentagon speaking to members of Congress? I know that, the Pentagon has issued some fairly alarming reports about climate change. They seem to be being completely ignored by this administration. Are they reaching out to members of Congress with their concerns?
I can't say I've seen anything directly, but it doesn't mean they're not doing it with the committee's jurisdiction. I'm sure they're having far more conversations. Right now, the conversations we're having have been around this money being stolen by the president for the wall.
Right. That would be like Armed Services Committee, you mean?
Yeah, Armed Services Committee, potentially on appropriations, the defense side of it. There's a couple, maybe through the Intelligence Committee. I doubt it, not so much there. But, that's where those conversations happen at a greater detail.
Yeah. I wish it would get more publicity, too, because it just, people pay attention to the Pentagon, whether we like it or not. They
right.
And we should pay attention to the Pentagon. It's amazing. Anyhow, Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls for the Congressman in just a moment. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Pocan.house.gov is the website. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. And welcome back. And let's see here. I've got to. Joyce, you need to make line 2 hot so that I can put him on the air. Please. There we go. Okay, Mike in Montpelier, Vermont. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Mike? Mike? No, Mike. Okay, I can't do that. Literally every line is full, but Joyce is call screening people and apparently taking a little time here. So, Congressman, what are you expecting to happen? I saw a news report this morning that that there will be articles of impeachment coming forward in October. What do you know about this?
Nothing specific. I think a lot of this has been put out every month for quite a while. I do think that the Judiciary Committee under Jerry Nadler has been very clear that they're under an investigation. That's the language that's been filed with the courts. I think inquiry was the language that most of us were looking for. I don't know how semantically different this will be, but they're supposedly doing everything they can to get witnesses to come forward so they can then decide if they're going to actually, as a committee, draft articles of impeachment. But I think that's the committee to really watch on this, because while other people have drafted articles of impeachment, I think we all know that that's the committee where the action is going to happen. So Jerry Nadler is really going to be one of the most point persons in this process in the next 60 days.
Yeah, okay. Mike, can you hear me now?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, you're on the air.
Yeah, I'm not Mike. I'm Bob, and I'm not in Montpelier. I'm in Burlington.
Okay, something screwed up then. I'm going to put you on hold, and we'll let Joyce figure that one out. Mike, I got another Mike in Buffalo, New York. Is that you, Mike?
How you doing today?
Good. You're on the air.
I just got a question for you. Doesn't the president have a right to move funds around, and wasn't that whole thing litigated, and the Supreme Court said that it was legal for him to do that?
Congressman?
I think you're supposed. Yeah, I think you can do it, but you should have a real reason to do it. And again, the wall is not a real reason. It's not just me as a progressive Democrat saying that. The last appropriation process under Paul Ryan, the both years under Paul Ryan, the Republicans who are in the majority in the House and the Senate, put language in that said no money could go towards any designs after, and I forgot what month it was, which is when the designs came out for the wall. So even the Republicans, when they were in charge, knew it was dumb to put money to the wall. So the fact that the president's stealing it now from things like barracks for soldiers in order to justify the wall that he desperately wants is not exactly an emergency or necessary, especially when he told us Mexico is going to pay for that. So I think our beef really is what's more important, our soldiers and the money that goes for them, or this fantasy of a wall?
Why can't, is it the House that's, presumably the Senate would pass money for Trump's wall. Is it just that the Democrats are saying this is crazy, we're not going to do it?
But even the Republicans said, as I said, under Paul Ryan, they're the ones who put the language in that no money could go to any design that came after whatever date, which is the date the wall came out. Even they didn't want to put a dime to the wall. And I
this
think
was
we really
when
need
Trump
to
was president.
That. Yes, exactly. So only Donald Trump wants a wall. Even Paul Ryan and the Republicans in the House and the Senate knew better.
So Trump's beef is really with Paul Ryan.
His beef is with the world, I think. So yeah, that's one of them.
Okay, Congressman Mark Pocan. We'll be right back. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Over at Tom, you can check it out, get the whole thing. So check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back, Congressman Mark Pocan, taking your calls for the hour. Amir in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello to both of you, and thanks, Congressman, for all the work that you do. Just a really quick question. Quite welcome. So we know that Donald Trump is he's a known cheater, right? And it's pretty clear that he cheated during the general election. Basic intuition would lead me to believe that he cheated during the primaries as well. I know that there were some irregularities with polling, I believe in December or January, just prior to the Republican primaries jumping off. What's the possibility of being able to start some investigations along those lines and being able to peel away some of the Trump voters?
Yeah, Amir, I'll tell you, I think the people that are the hardcore Trump people are going to be there whether he cheats or steals or does much of the lying that he does on a daily basis, as long as he doesn't like people with brown and black skin. Unfortunately, there is a very large contingent that's with him based on racism and that alone, and they let him get away with absolutely anything. And, I don't know if going back to the primaries, I don't think there is as much from my recollection that we could really go off of that, but we do have to realize that this guy didn't win the national vote, for one. We know that we've got to look at some of these states where the Electoral College is going to really matter, including my home state of Wisconsin. But I think he's had the biggest drop-off of any state that he won is in Wisconsin, thanks to what he's doing with the tariffs right now. So I would rather focus, I think, a little bit on that. Let's focus on what he's done illegal and that we need to do in Congress. Let's focus on what he's doing right now to farmers and others in the economy and try to convince people that way. But I don't think you're going to pull away a lot of Republican voters that his base is. I think we just need to make sure that people who are still, undecided or independent understand what this guy's about, and I don't see that being very appealing to them.
Bob in Burlington, Vermont. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Tom. I'd like to first make a comment. When you follow up on that little ditty that you make at the end of the show about democracy not being a spectator sport, and you actually get elected, the downside is you don't get to listen to Thom Hartmann much anymore. What I'd like to bring up is these emails that are coming around to a lot of state legislators to basically get people to sign on to this idea of a constitutional convention being a great thing. They're getting their numbers up there significantly. Most of it, the impact is a lie, and I think it's, there's only one Koch brother left, but he's not insignificant. I don't think we're talking about that enough, and I'd like to promote the idea that ending Citizens United, you might get a lot more than you bargained for.
Okay, Bob. There's actually two competing narratives here, Congressman. There is the Koch brothers are promoting this idea of an actual constitutional convention. They've been rehearsing it year after year after year in D.C. They're up to 30 some odd states. They need 34 to call it and 37 to ratify it, to literally rewrite the Constitution, like from the ground up. On the other hand, there is one progressive group out there that is calling for a, quote, constitutional convention just to rewrite Citizens United or just to overturn Citizens United. I think constitutional convention is the wrong way to do that. I think that he's conflating the two of these in that comment. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I think going the constitutional convention route, I believe there are 3 states from ratification, and it's not done by people who are trying to do things that we care about. It's people with a very specific agenda. So I'd be cautious about opening that up for any issue.
Yeah, there you go. Robert in Spokane, you're Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, this is Robert, and I have a question for you. I am a Republican, but I'm a respectful one. And the economy question, the Green New Deal really worries me, and I don't mind paying for it. But my biggest concern is, why do we have to pay for other countries, portions of it? And China gets an exemption for 20 years. Why is that fair to us?
Well, Robert, I think the idea is that because we have such a big economy, first of all, we're doing what we need to do to help protect the environment. But 2, if we make these changes, companies are going to change the products they put out there because you're not going to have multiple different products out there. So any initiatives that we take on this not only will help to have a cleaner environment, but also if we take the initiative, we're going to have those jobs here, and we'll be leading on that front as well. So there's no reason that we shouldn't be doing this. And, a lot of that's talking points, a lot of reasons not to do it, but if you really put any thought into it, you don't not do anything because someone else isn't doing anything. Instead, we take the initiative, we create those jobs here, we fix our economy and grow our economy because of it, and the markets are going to change to follow that because we are such a big part of it, and then they're going to be behind. So I don't see any logic to the argument that I know has been put out there that you're mentioning.
Yeah. Oh, but this is the talking point of the fossil fuel industry. Congressman, we've got 20 seconds left. What should we be looking for in the week ahead?
This is your last couple days that people are home. Next week, we're all back in Washington. So if you see a member of Congress somewhere, take advantage of it in your district. But then we're going to be back, and it's going to be really busy because we're going to have a continuing resolution. Our fiscal year ends September 30th. We're going to try to take care of gun violence prevention legislation, look for talks on infrastructure, prescription drugs. It's going to be a busy floor period. Be active, be aware.
Okay, you got it. Congressman Pocan, thanks so much for being with us.
Of course, Tom. Thank you, as always.
Thank you. Great talking with you. We'll be back with more in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We're gonna get into what's going on. Is it possible that some of Trump's policies could even lead us to a nuclear war with Russia?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Russia Trap, How Our Shadow War with Russia Could Spiral into Nuclear Catastrophe by George S. Beebe. This is from the introduction. This book is a pre-mortem, an examination of a failure that has not yet happened. It focuses on one of the most difficult problems that statesmen face, how to anticipate and avoid a war that no one wants and few believe is likely or even possible, but nonetheless arises because of a combustive mixture of clashing ambitions, new technologies, misplaced fears, entangled alliances and commitments, domestic political pressures, and mistaken assumptions about how adversaries might react. In other words, it's about diagnosing and diffusing a nascent World War I problem with Russia. What was then called the Great War produced what was arguably the greatest man-made catastrophe in human history. It ended a century of relatively peaceful balance of power among Europe's leading states. It destroyed the Ottoman Empire and laid the basis for a century of war and terrorism in the Middle East. It hastened the demise of the British Empire and led to Hitler's rise, the destruction of World War II, the tragedy of the Holocaust, and the development of nuclear weapons. It paved the way to Soviet communism and decades of Cold War that spanned the globe. It decimated a generation of Europeans and left in its wake a nihilistic philosophical legacy that has devastating consequences for societies across the Western world. And almost no one saw World War I coming. World War I resulted more from miscalculation and ineptitude than from design. Historians have long debated which of the combatants bore the most responsibility for the conflict, but few dispute that each of the major powers contributed its quota of short-sightedness and irresponsibility to the disaster. Germany feared encirclement by France, Russia, and Britain, but ham-handedly threatened each in ways that encouraged them to unite in an unprecedented alliance against Berlin. That alliance, in turn, cemented Germany's dependence on Austria-Hungary and ultimately made it a hostage to its southern neighbors' actions. Britain believed the alliance would contain Germany's growing military and economic might, not lock London into a set of rigid commitments that made diplomatic resolution of a localized conflict all but impossible. Austria-Hungary's fear that nationalism could tear its empire apart from within blinded it to the dangers that a limited war in the Balkans could quickly spin into a catastrophic European conflagration. Tsar Nicholas II assumed that a limited mobilization against Austria-Hungary would deter aggression against Russia's friend Serbia, only to learn that his general staff's war plans mandated a full mobilization against Austria-Hungary and Germany. The spread of railway technology in turn meant that any state that did not mobilize its army quickly in response faced the near certain prospect of a rapid military defeat. The result was a potent mix of volatile ingredients that fueled what Henry Kissinger called a political doomsday machine, susceptible to any number of political triggers. Few people in Washington today believe that our tense relations with Russia pose this type of challenge. Rather, the dominant paradigm for understanding and responding to the Russian threat is, quote, the World War II problem. American editorials and op-eds about Russia abound with disparaging references to Munich, where British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain made his tragic bid to appease Hitler's territorial ambitions in 1938 and achieved his ill-fated peace in our time. During the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign, Democratic Party candidate Hillary Clinton explicitly warned that Moscow's claims that it must protect Russian minorities in the Ukraine echoed Nazi Germany's arguments that it had to protect German minorities in Poland and Czechoslovakia. Similarly, Senator Lindsey Graham and many other Republicans have likened Russian President Putin to Adolf Hitler, while newspaper columnists referred to him as Putler. Like Hitler, Putin is perceived as an authoritarian leader harboring deep resentments over lost territory and unfair treatment. Like Hitler, Putin is believed to regard calls for diplomatic compromise as signs of weakness that he can exploit. And like Hitler, Putin is thought to harbor expansionist designs that will be curbed only by pushing back now before he grows too strong. For those who see the Russian threat through this prism, the chief danger is the Kremlin's aggressive intentions, and the imperative is to deter aggression through strength. Wars often happen because those who start them think they can win. Disabusing an aggressor of that belief, therefore, is critical to preserving the peace. For intelligence analysts, this translates into a focus on studying Russian war plans and weapon systems while looking for signs of impending attack. U.S. and NATO military experts analyzing Russia's preparations for its large West military exercise in 2017, for example, issued warnings that the event could be a Russian Trojan horse, masking preparations for occupying Belarus or invading one of the Baltic states. British intelligence officials caution that Russian cyber operators have acquired the ability to shut down power plants, hijack air traffic control, and even turn off air conditioning systems. U.S. intelligence community leaders sound alarms about Moscow's desire to undermine Western democracy and destroy the post-World War II international order. Hollywood actor Morgan Freeman, sponsored by a committee that includes former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, solemnly warns America in a viral social media video that we are at war already with Russia and must fight back or suffer defeat. Not everyone views Russia as offensive-minded, however. A smaller and less popular school of thought sees Russia under Putin as a weak and declining power. The book, The Russia Trap. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is George S. Beebe. He's written a new book. It's called The Russia Trap, How Our Shadow War with Russia Could Spire into Nuclear Catastrophe. George is the Vice President and Director of Studies at the Center for the National Interest. He formerly was the Director of the CIA's Russia Analysis and Special Advisor to Dick Cheney for Russia and Eurasia and intelligence programs. George, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I can't hear you, George, for some reason. Oh, I've got him on hybrid 2. No? Yeah, George, are you talking to us? You've got to use your phone.
I'm on a phone.
Yeah, just put your phone up to your head and let's talk on the phone. please.
All right, very good.
Yeah, we just use the phone for audio. It's a whole long story, but anyhow, I find your book fascinating. If I could just start out with this is on page 57. You're talking about how for Vladimir Putin, how everything changed basically with the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, like the Rose Revolution before that. Basically the Clinton administration started making Kiev, Ukraine, the third largest recipient of American foreign aid after Israel and Egypt. And you write, from the Kremlin's perspective, Ukraine and Russia had essentially been one country ruled from Moscow for almost the entire time the United States had been a nation. I didn't know that. And I think when you combine that with this story that when the Soviet Union was dissolving, basically the deal that George Herbert Walker Bush made with Mr. Gorbachev was that we would not place NATO, we would not bring countries that border Russia into NATO, that Russia's feeling encircled. Is that an accurate characterization of one of the main points of your book?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think Russia has been feeling encircled for quite some time. I think it started back in the mid-1990s with the first rounds of NATO enlargement, and then it continued and intensified over time. And it really has turned from a suspicion into a solid conviction. And one of the problems that you face when you deal with a country that feels like it's cornered is that it tends to lash out in response. It becomes more dangerous than it might otherwise be. And that's a good part of the problem that we're facing with Russia right now, but not the whole part. Part of the problem is that Russia is not just playing defense, it's also playing offense. And it's playing offense because it thinks it needs to be a great power. One of the few countries in the world that decides the world's key issues, sits at the board of directors, so to speak, of international powers, along with the United States and China and Europe. And it feels, for a lot of reasons, that unless it is a great power, that it can't continue to exist as Russia in its present form. So it's a strange mix of offensive and defensive motivations that we're dealing with.
But if you look at Russian history, it's brutal. I mean, it's absolutely. Going back hundreds of years, that region has been repeatedly invaded and involved in wars, and Hitler and everybody else. Here in the United States, we've never experienced anything close to that. This obviously is not to give Russia a pass on their behavior, but Putin initially, when he became president, wanted to work with the United States, at least according to what I read in your book. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then,
he did.
And then as he decided that things weren't going so well, he kind of backed away. President Obama tried to restart that process, tried to reset it. It didn't work out well. As long as, it seems to me that feeling of we've got to be at the board is there's actually some justification for that. It's a defensive feeling. But how should we be dealing with this? What should our policy be toward Russia?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is recognize the kind of problem that we're dealing with. And right now, I don't think we're actually accurately understanding what the danger is. We think we have a deterrence problem. And in the book, I shorthand this as a World War II problem. In other words, an aggressor state like Nazi Germany under Hitler that will push outward as far and as fast as it can until it reaches determined resistance. And we all know from Winston Churchill what happens when you try to appease a state like that. It actually whets its appetite for even more aggression, and it makes the problem worse than it would be if you actually
Neville Chamberlain, actually, but yeah.
Exactly. And so if you look at how Americans say they're perceiving the threat, you see lots of references to Nazi Germany and Munich and Yalta. And our big concern is not that we will get sucked into an inadvertent war with Russia, but rather we won't be resolute enough, tough enough, bold enough to stand up to what we perceive as a revanchist authoritarian Russia. Now, what I argue in the book is that picture is only partially right. There are certainly aspects of revanchism in Russia. Its internal system has evolved in directions that the United States is not at all happy about. It has conducted aggression against its neighbors. It has interfered in the United States' internal politics. But it's doing so, I believe, not because it is a classic aggressor state like Nazi Germany that we can deter by standing up to it. It's doing it because of a complex mix of factors that are all combining to produce distorted perceptions on both sides, unsettled arrangements for European security. This is compounded by new technologies like in the cyber arena or artificial intelligence or anti-satellite weaponry that we don't fully understand and that are changing the nature of the competition between states and between the U.S. and Russia. And these factors are all combining and producing a vicious circle, an escalatory spiral, just like World War I. That was an example of a war that started not by design. None of the European states that were involved in that wanted a war. None of them expected a war, but they found themselves in one because of a cascade of events that they didn't anticipate. And that's really the danger that I argue we're facing right now.
Now, you're coming out of a Republican administration. Steve Cohen is a hardcore progressive, and he's been saying much the same thing on this program and in other venues for years, that if we view Russia as if they were Nazi Germany, it's not going to go well. But you know,
where it's not going well.
Yeah, absolutely. But on the other hand, we've got a president right now who seems to be. Who doesn't seem to have a coherent policy toward Russia other than give them what they want, and you've got Russia looking like, and just this is, correct me if I'm wrong, messing with NATO, messing with the UK with the whole Brexit thing, messing in American politics, out of apparently a sense of we've got to do this to defend ourselves. We've got to weaken this alliance or something like that. Back to my question, what should our policy be going forward if we want to avoid a World War I scenario? Because this is what, Steve Cohen is saying too, is, we could end up in a nuclear war with Russia, and that would not be a good thing. In fact, it might be the end of human life on the planet.
Right. That's a very serious thing, and the danger is very real, and it's one that we no longer fear, quite frankly. Back in the 1950s and 60s, a lot of Americans feared nuclear war with the Soviet Union. The media was concerned that the Cold War might turn hot. School children had air raid drills regularly.
I remember it well.
A lot of people even created backyard fallout shelters and stockpiled provisions. So this was something that we were legitimately concerned about, and the danger was actually genuine. We actually came close to a nuclear catastrophe with the Cuban Missile Crisis. But that sobered us up. In a way, it turned the Soviet threat into a bipartisan issue with shared conceptions of the danger, and people differed on the details about how you handled this, but I think everyone realized that we needed to put some rules in place, some provisions in place that would keep that Cold War competition from spiraling out of control. Now, today, people aren't afraid anymore. We think that the prospect of nuclear catastrophe with Russia is 40 years ago. We've been there, we've done that, we survived. We don't have to worry about that anymore. And moreover, I think that we have a new bipartisan perception that Russia's like Nazi Germany, and we have to stand up to it. And so both Democrats and Republicans basically offer the same prescription. What we need to do with Moscow to contain the danger is to punish, counter, and isolate, to take the fight to Russia in the cybersphere, to take the fight to Russia through proxy wars in the countries ringing Russian borders, isolate it economically, and show Russia that it can't win, that it will pay a high price for its aggression, and this supposedly will cause the Kremlin, as any rational actor would, to recalculate the costs and benefits of what it's doing and to back down. So what I think we need to do is, first of all, understand that that's not actually an accurate picture of the dynamics of the situation we're currently facing. And once you've grasped that you have a World War I style problem, where you've got feedback loops of all these different complex factors that are combining and reinforcing one another and potentially producing a large catastrophic outcome as a result of relatively small factors and events, then you can say, okay, what do we need to do here to minimize the danger?
Well, let's get to that. We have 55 seconds till we hit a hard break. What do we do?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is put rules of the game in place. The old rules that governed the Cold War that contained our rivalry with the Soviet Union are almost all gone. The INF Treaty disappeared a few months ago, and people barely noticed that it was gone. The New START Treaty looks set to expire in a couple of years, and we're not willing to engage in discussions with Moscow over what the new rules of the game should be. How do we handle the mutual threat of interference in each other's domestic political affairs? We're both vulnerable. We should be willing to say, how do we find a way forward here that we both recognize as legitimate and safeguards our mutual interests? Same thing with broader cyber operations, anti-satellite weaponry, dealing with artificial intelligence, new hyper velocity strategic missile systems. So that's the kind of discussion that we need to be having.
So treat them at least militarily as an equal rather than as Nazis.
Well, as a formidable competitor that we're not going to be friends with, we're not going to be partnered with, but whose rivalry we can manage.
That's the word. George S. Beebe, the book is The Russia Trap. Thank you, sir.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, 18 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Hang on just a second here. Bill in Sebastian, Florida. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Yeah, good afternoon, Tom. Mr. Beebe's thoughts seem to be no more than an extension of what James Schlesinger and the Bush administration was doing with the defensive weapons that they...
You're talking the first Bush administration?
Yes, no, the second Bush administration.
Oh, okay, well, Beebe was in that administration, so that makes a certain amount of sense.
Yeah, but this is no more than an extension to sell these defensive missiles to Poland and to other Eastern European countries. And
well, no, I've read most of his book. He's not suggesting that we militarize. I don't believe that he's suggesting that we militarize Russia's borders. I mean, that's what's got that's what flipped them out. Was Bill Clinton went back on that deal that George Herbert Walker Bush had worked out with Gorbachev, and started inviting countries that bordered Russia, into NATO, and that was the point at which Russia flipped out.
Well, I don't know. It's hard for me to understand why Trump right now would sell these.
Well, Trump will do anything that Putin wants right now because he wants to build a hotel in Moscow.
Well, why are they allowing Korea to shoot these missiles off and selling defensive missiles to Japan? Well, that's no more than a proliferation.
That's because Trump thinks that he's the world's greatest negotiator and he's going to bring peace to North Korea, and he's delusional. And Kim Jong-un is playing him like a minnow, not even like a good-sized fish. I mean, Kim is just he's eating Trump's lunch. But that's a completely different discussion than the Russia discussion. What's your solution?
I don't feel there's a threat from the Russians. I don't feel there's a nuclear threat from the Russians. I don't feel like they're offensive as everyone makes them out to be.
I think that this is a defensive response on their part, not an offensive response. That and in fact, all of the quote offensive stuff that they've been doing up to this point has been pretty much on their borders, in what former Soviet Georgia, in Ukraine. These are countries that they perceive as essentially their buffer zone, that they see NATO and Western countries trying to seize political, economic, and ultimately military control of to threaten Russia. And whether their paranoia is justified or not is a whole other discussion. But as long as that paranoia is there and is real, they might. And now that I think we just nuked the treaty. No pun intended. We just did away with the treaty that prevented battlefield nuclear weapons. And Trump announced that he wants to start developing these things, and Russia apparently already is. I mean, that could turn a local fight into a nuclear fight, which could then go worldwide really rapidly.
Yeah, well, all right then, Tom. All right. Thanks for your thoughts.
I may be wrong, Bill. I may be wrong. It may be that this is all hysteria and oh my God, and but reading his book, his recommendations, at least what I was reading, was not that we need more nukes, we need more missiles, we need more military power, we need to spend more money on the military. It was none of that. It was that we need to start viewing Russia as a competitor. And in fact, that was the word that was in the book, and I appreciate his reminding me of it, and dealing with them out of at least a level of respect. And I think that was something that has been missing. Anyhow, Bill, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's a few other things. I don't want to just turn this hour into all Russia all the time. There's a bunch of other things in the news here that I want to share with you. And then after the break at the bottom of the hour, we'll pick up your phone calls and go with this. The health insurance, the healthcare industry is fighting back. This is absolutely fascinating. This whole surprise billing thing. You go into the hospital and you think that you've got insurance that's going to cover everything, and you get home and suddenly you've got a bill for $5,000 or $10,000 because the anesthesiologist was out of network and you didn't even know because you were unconscious, or because they used some piece of machinery that wasn't covered by your insurance policy. This is the new gotchas, right? The new gotchas. And the hospitals are making money on this. The doctors are making money on this. And the insurance companies are saving money on this. So both Republicans and Democrats in both the House and the Senate are proposing legislation to stop this problem called surprise billing. And now, guess what? There's a PAC, a mystery group. It's called the Doctor-Patient Unity, and it's spent $13 million in 20 states just since July on an advertising campaign telling people that this is, bad policy, don't let your legislators do this, stop them, all this kind of thing. Plus, the American Medical Association has spent $11.5 million both of these groups trying to keep surprise billing intact. This is nuts, right? The leading cause of bankruptcies in America is still somebody got sick. It's still, these huge deductibles that we still have, and there is something very, very wrong with this. And what this tells me is that if we want to solve our health care situation in the United States, we need to go for Medicare for all, number one, and it needs to be comprehensive, fully inclusive, and no more of this. Oh, there's 20% that we don't cover BS. Just straightforward, number one. And the second thing it tells me is, if they're going to spend, $20 million, the AMA and this new group that's sprung up, just fighting this simple legislation to stop surprise billing. They're going to declare nuclear war against us, to extend the metaphor of the last segment. They're going to declare war against us when it comes to Medicare for all in a huge way. So we need to get ready for that, and we need to do some serious educational work about what's going on here and where we go with this. Anyhow, we'll be back. A little more of the news of the day, and I'll be picking up your phone calls right after this. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
By the way, if you haven't seen it, check out the Washington Post has, by the editors themselves, saying, Mitch McConnell, do something about guns. It's amazing. We're reading today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the number 2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is from Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near-daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. It's too weird here, she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, Madam President. We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. Did y'all sleep here, a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, Trump triumphs, and the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown, and for a moment I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope that change was going to come at last. Truth in Our Times by David McCraw.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Joan McCarter over at Daily Kos. The headline says it all. Pence's office claims Pence's chief of staff misreported Trump's role in latest emolument scandal. Here's the deal. Pence stayed when it went to Ireland. And, that's a whole nother story, the prime minister. But he went to Ireland and he stayed hours away, 4 extra motorcade trips, 4 extra flights away from Dublin to stay at a Trump hotel, which cost the taxpayers a fortune. And, 4 flights on Air Force Two, plus, all the 4 different motorcades, plus the security, plus everything else. And Pence's number 2 guy says, well, don't worry, Trump negotiated a discounted room rate with us for the hotel. All right. These emolument scandals are getting, huge. But anyway. Let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Stephen in Naples, Florida. Hey, Stephen, it says you disagree with me about what?
Well, there's a few things. How you doing today? Thank you for my call. So the first thing is the whole Russian thing. I just want to get this straight. Do you think Trump is an agent of Russia?
I think that Trump is covering up the fact that he lied to the American people and he lied to Republican voters during the primary when he said that he was not currently and actively trying to negotiate a hotel in Russia, when in fact he was. He was literally right up until the day he was elected president. And we now know that, and we know that he lied about that. And his attempts to cover up his lies, which, by the way, are crimes. Lying about something like that is a violation of federal election laws. So A, he's trying to cover up his crimes. B, I think he still wants to build that hotel in Russia. And C, I think all of this, if set aside anything of PP tapes or whatever, I think that this is what's going on. This is why he allows, he'll stand up in Helsinki and say, well, our intelligence service says A, but Mr. Putin says B, and therefore I'm going to go with Putin. No president of the United States has ever done that, and none ever would.
There's been 5 different investigations.
I can't hear you, Stephen.
Talking about. So there's been 5 different investigations.
Yeah, Stephen, I'm sorry. There's been 5 different investigations. Nobody is disputing that Trump lied to you, Stephen. I mean, obviously you're a Trump supporter. Trump lied to you when he said that he wasn't trying to build a hotel in Moscow, that, and so, there you go. Jeremy in Houston, Texas. Hey, Jeremy, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. What's on your mind?
Yeah, so my question to you was some moments back, you had did a program on the policing power of the U.S. Congress and if they can enforce and teach it. And so you brought up Andrew Jackson back in the day with the Trail of Tears. I was going to ask you, do you see a possibility of the UN getting involved if this 2020 election is contested?
No. The UN doesn't have the ability to get involved in a contested election. So, no, I don't think that's going to happen. Thanks for the call. Suzanne in Sacramento. Hey, Suzanne, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. I usually call you related to women of color. I've been thinking a lot about the issues you're raising in terms of we are used to a world in which, can you hear me?
Yeah, just fine, Suzanne.
Okay, we are used to a world in which there's domination by people of European background with the U.S. and the eastern section of Europe. That has been the control of most of the world. However, the United States is no longer that kind of country that is totally white dominated, because we are changing over into a more diverse population. I think the problem for the white supremacists is they're fighting on one hand with the Russians on some things, and then they've got to fight here at home. We are not surprised at all of these things, because for African Americans and other people of color, we've already been subjected to many of the things that happened in Hitler or Stalin or Putin or whoever. But we are not forgetting that. I see some of the Democrats are making a big mistake. We've been asking them for the last 10 years to include issues of women of color as the only people subjected both to racism and sexism. Other than Elizabeth Warren, every other presidential candidate that the Democrats have refuses to address that. That was true of Obama, too. And that was one of the reasons he had a drop in the votes of African Americans. It was one of the reasons that Hillary Clinton claimed to have more African American supporters, but in fact did not. We knew that. Black women were not supportive of her. And with Biden, it's the same thing. They're trying to push him as having support of the black community. They're looking at a model of the black community back in the 60s, not as it is now. You cannot exclude the millennials and all those younger voters that are getting energized because they saw their parents incarcerated, because they're sick and tired of looking at the children in cages. And those of us who are older are with them. So when Nancy Pelosi said to the squad, as they're referred to, that they need to remember they only had 4 votes, she lost a lot with African American women. And she may think that we're forgetting that. We are not. And we have been calling her on that, and she's been ignoring it. We don't understand why. Now we're beginning to think she should not be speaker, and we're beginning to circulate that. If the Democrats do not understand that they cannot simply call on black women and other women of color to vote for them, volunteer for them, give money to them, and then after the election, they ignore all of our issues. If they don't start with racism plus sexism, they're not on our side. That's our point of view, because we are dying at the highest rate from every curable disease. We get the highest rate of foreclosures, 40%, where white men and women and men of color get 52%. Every disorder we are victim of, and they don't want to address it. And like you were talking to the man about Russia, where are the African American women that are called on to comment on international issues? We're not on any of that. They pick people who are either married to or friends of Democrat men in power. The grassroots working class are shut out. But we are growing in power anyway, and they're not going to be able to stop that. And it's going to it may lead to a horrible situation here before it's over. Trump didn't bring racism. Trump has exposed some of the closet racism.
Suzanne, you said that Elizabeth Warren is the one person who has addressed this issue. Specifically, what has she done or said that addresses this issue?
She's putting out plans of activities and actions that she will take immediately on election that implements programs to address issues of women of color. She is the only one. None of the rest. They talk generally about racism or sexism, but they never talk about it for us as we want it.
Well, at least we have one candidate. I'm sorry.
Well,
I don't mean to make light of it, but it is good to have somebody explicitly addressing this issue, because I think you're right. This is an entire issue that has been largely swept under the rug for centuries, certainly for decades.
Yeah, well, I would hope that you would invite some of the grassroots women of color leaders to be on your show.
Sure. Yeah. We are listening. Sean is listening, and we'll start reaching out. Thank you, Suzanne, for your feedback and for your thoughts. I appreciate it. Jasper in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Hey, Jasper, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
Okay. It seems to me that we're having a problem with places where you can take guns, but I know that in all of the state houses and in the Congress, they will not allow guns to come in there.
Right, just like they don't allow them into the NRA conventions.
Huh?
Just like they don't allow them into the NRA conventions.
That's right. And I'm wondering, are there any gun restrictions on Trump's property? Or can anybody take them there? And so when they're out there golfing or just mollyhanning around, even if he's not there. And I think when people are talking to those people, they need to remind them that that blood is on them, because they want to allow a gun to come up any time. They call for sanctuary, but they'll allow them to come into church.
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing, and thank you for the call, Jasper. I'm guessing that would have to do with the state laws in the places where Trump has a hotel. Peter in Chicago, you got a quick one here, Peter?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Good.
Real quick, I've got to give you a compliment, Tom, that you do a wonderful job on your show, that you have your callers calling up thinking that the president won't step down out of office if he's not reelected, and that he's an actual agent of Russia. It's amazing to me that they think that, but it just shows.
I am not making those assertions. I think he is operating in ways.
On your show, and you're talking about other people who do, Tom.
Yeah.
And it's not a hit at you, Tom. I mean, you do a good job.
No, I get it. What's your point? What's your point, Peter? This is not about me. What's your point?
I'm sorry?
What's your point?
Well, I'm just amazed that you have all these callers today calling in thinking Trump's not going to.
Got it. It's not just my callers who are concerned about this. Donald Trump himself has said that he feels like he got a couple of years stolen from him by Robert Mueller, and he should be able to stick around a little longer. He himself has said that even if he wins a second term, he should be able to stay longer than that. And then he says, I was just joking. Right. 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In about 4 minutes, we'll be checking in with Bob Ney with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world. Stick around. And welcome back, Everett in Detroit. Hey, Everett, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I want to ask a quick question. I want to know, after all the scandals President Trump's been in, does General Flynn still draw his retirement pay?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to it, Everett. I'm guessing he does, because he has not yet been convicted of a felony, and I think you have to be convicted in order to be in a position where you might lose pensions or retirement funds. But I
know, but under the UCMJ, it's the rank that he held honorably. And once he declared that he was guilty, it's not honorable no more.
So has Flynn pled guilty? I thought he was pleading not guilty and was trying to work out a deal.
Well, I thought when he accepted the plea deal, that was he showed that he was guilty.
Yeah. I have not been following Flynn's trials and tribulations quite well enough ever to know exactly, but I'll have to look into it. Thanks a lot for the call, though. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, Suzanne really had it right. She had a lot to say. I thought she said what she said really well.
Mm-hmm.
I always wanted to comment on the nuclear issue with Russia.
Okay.
I think what it is the whole world is kind of being held hostage by the nuclear industry. It's not so much Russia herself as a nation, as any kind of cultured civilization that.
Are you talking about nuclear weapons or nuclear power?
Yeah, well, nuclear power and nuclear weapons and nuclear medicine. The nuclear industry has a, and you're also mentioning the healthcare industry fighting back. They're in cahoots with the nuclear industry as well. The nuclear industry has kind of taken hostage the whole world in a sense. And I think it's imperative.
Bob, docs and hospitals who use, radiation as a form of treatment. And yeah, there are some isotopes that are used, some for markers, some for actual therapies that come out of nuclear reactors. Typically, though, they're not coming out of commercial nuclear reactors, and they're not coming out of military nuclear reactors. There's actually a business of small nuclear reactors that produce these radioisotopes, that are used for brain mapping and body mapping and in some cases for therapy. I don't see this as a monolithic industry, Bob. Certainly we've got the defense industry, and then you get the power industry.
Don't forget about the machines, the CAT scan machines, the X-ray machines, all the machines. And the industry is under-regulated, and it's causing havoc around the world. And it's not the medicine that's causing a problem. It's not the limited isotopes that are causing the problem. It's the push.
I think if you break your leg or your ankle, Bob, you're going to be very grateful for an X-ray machine.
I'm not saying I wouldn't be, but it's the push for nuclear power and nuclear energy and nuclear weapons around the world that is causing these problems.
It is a problem, Bob. I'll give you that, but I'm not I'm not quite in full conspiracy mode. We'll be back with Bob Ney with Talk Media News in just a minute. He's going to bring us up to date on what's going on in the world. Stick around. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. So let's check in with Talk Media News right now and find out what's going on in the world today. Bob Ney with Talk Media News is on the line with us. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am great. I hope you are too. What's on your mind? Or what's going on in the world today?
Well, I did want to, this news is 3 days old, but it ties into callers that have had questions about Michael Flynn, you know, and whether he did a plea. Michael Flynn did a guilty plea of lying to the government, and his sentencing is to be sometime this fall.
So
However,
sorry, go ahead, finish.
I'm sorry. And so his lawyers, though, however, have now said that they want access to information in the Mueller report and some other additional information that he was part of a twist and a maneuver and a plot, and they want additional information relating to Trump and Russia. So I just thought I would throw that out there.
Now, when he pled guilty or pleaded guilty to that crime, did he lose his? Did that mean that he got a dishonorable discharge, and did that mean that he lost his pension?
No, it doesn't, because here's how it goes. When you plead guilty, you have pled guilty, but you are treated as if you are not convicted, because in this case, for example, they're trying to get new additional information. That plea could be reversed, changed. A judge could rule it's not appropriate.
So it's all on abeyance right now.
Right. Yeah. Now, the day you're sentenced, that becomes the conviction. And at that point in time, however, the pensions are not lost, because there's never been an across-the-board removal of pensions unless you're expelled. If you're expelled, it's different. Otherwise, pensions have always remained. Rob Blagojevich, myself, others, Flynn, anybody in the federal government, because they've never come to terms with a broad brush on pensions.
Fascinating. So what's at the top of the news today, Bob?
Yes, I just wanted to add that to clear up on that Flynn stuff. This is something else. Trump allies are raising money to target specifically reporters. Now, they're raising about $2 million as we speak to investigate reporters and editors of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and, quote, other outlets.
Right,
now, this is a fundraising pitch that's been sent out there, by the way.
This is intimidation.
Yeah, well, and it's a fundraising pitch. I'm actually, a friend of mine's supposed to send me the pitch because I actually want to see it, but he told me about it, and then it's been in one of the articles today. So what they're doing is they're going to target reporters and editors, and they are going to go after social media platforms. They're going to allege bias. Now, that's the smokescreen, Tom, that they're going to go after bias. Actually, what's going to happen here is that this money will most likely be used in opposition research, which is private investigators. And then if they dig up information on, quote, the left, meaning CNN, MSNBC, whoever on the left, anybody, then they will try to have the right media outlets fork that information out to the general public.
Yeah, my guess is that they're looking for, what's being reported is that they're looking for things like, let's pick on Bob Schieffer because I don't think he's doing the media anymore. Say he reports a story for CBS News that says that, Donald Trump has done some terrible thing. And so immediately they come out and say, but look at this. Back 6 years ago, Bob Schieffer posted a Facebook page that he thought Donald Trump was a no good human being. And therefore you can't trust him. He's biased. I'm guessing, though, that they're also going to be wanting to say, and by the way, he was having an affair.
Yes. That's the part I was going to add. Absolutely media bias. There is no question this money will be used for, quote, opposition research, which are private investigators. And then if they've had any type of scandal, whatever, they will add that into the mix, not just of bias. There's no question that's what this is going to mean. If I'm a reporter with those newspapers, I'm going to read this and take it that way.
That's incredible. What else is up, Bob?
Absolutely. Well, McConnell. Now, I had a couple of Republicans today that were telling me they knew why Mitch McConnell is saying he's going to wait for the White House to chart the path on gun violence legislation. They think he's doing it to give cover for his Senate Republicans. I'm arguing that that might be part of the reason, but I'm arguing the real reason is they don't trust the president, because in his public statement, this is what McConnell said. He said he wants to make sure that senators would actually be making a law and not having serial votes.
Right. So he's, in other words, he's afraid that if they pass legislation, say just bringing back the assault weapons ban, I mean, something relatively innocuous that was not controversial and was actually aggressively supported by George Herbert Walker Bush and Ronald Reagan back in the day. Let's say that they bring back the assault weapon ban, they pass it through the House and Senate, goes to Trump's desk. Trump gets a call from Wayne LaPierre, who goes, "What? What are you doing?" And Trump goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, Wayne, no problem," and he vetoes it. And now Mitch has got egg on his face. Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, that's correct.
Yeah.
This is not just about protecting Republicans. This is about not trusting the president.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Bob Nate. Thanks a lot, Bob.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. And thank you for being with us today. It's, a fascinating day. A lot going on in the world. It's only going to get more and more interesting as time goes on. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. But in the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. So, hey, check out your local Democratic Party. Consider running for precinct committee person or simply applying for the gig. In some cases, you can get paid for this. There's so much that you can do. There's so many ways you can get involved. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.